Tonight, we drift across the Nullarbor Karst maze, where rainwater has been quietly shaping stone beneath a wide, pale plain. Settle in and let the journey move slowly. The air feels dry at first, with a faint taste of salt and dust, while somewhere below your feet, old water paths wait in the darkness. We are not hurrying across the Nullarbor tonight. We are listening to it. Above us, the sky opens broad and clean, and the limestone plain stretches outward with almost no interruption, as if the earth has been smoothed by time and silence. Under that still surface, the Nullarbor Karst maze begins, not with a roar, but with rain. You can imagine the first drops arriving softly after a long dry spell. They touch the ground and darken the pale crust, bead on low plants, and sink into cracks too narrow for your eye to follow. The scent rises slowly, mineral and warm, like dust remembering water. Each drop carries a little breath of the sky, a little dissolved carbon dioxide, and that small change makes the water gently acidic. It's not harsh water. It doesn't force its way through stone. It simply waits, gathers, seeps, and returns again after each season, after each passing weather pattern, after each long interval of dryness. On the Nullarbor, rain can seem rare and modest, but over deep time, even modest rain becomes a patient sculptor. You and I can follow it now, not as a flood, but as a quiet thread moving downward. The limestone beneath the Nullarbor began as an ancient seabed, laid down when warm, shallow water covered this part of Australia. Tiny shells, coral fragments and marine particles settled grain by grain until they became a pale stone full of memory. When you picture it, you can almost feel the old sea still there, cool and faintly salty, held inside the rock like a whisper. As we move across the plain, the surface seems simple. It's flat in a way that feels almost unreal. With a horizon so wide, your thoughts begin to loosen. But the simplicity is only the first layer. Beneath your steps, rainwater has opened passages, widened joints, dissolved chambers, and connected hollow places into a hidden maze of Nullarbor Karst. The water begins with the smallest openings, a hairline fracture, a bedding plane between layers of limestone, a soft line where one old deposit meets another. You might not notice these places at the surface, though the stone knows them well. When rain enters, it follows weakness, and with each passing drop it carries away a trace of calcium carbonate. So little you could never see it in your hand, but time sees it. Time measures what we can't. A crack becomes a seam becomes a slot, and a slot becomes a passage where cool air can rest in the stone. The Nullarbor Karst maze is made from these quiet decisions, repeated across years that feel too large to hold. You descend with the water by imagining its patience. Above, the plain may be hot in daylight, with air shimmering near the ground and the smell of dry grass lying close to the limestone. Below, the temperature steadies. The world becomes cooler, stiller, and more enclosed. Your breathing slows because the space asks for slowness. There is no need to rush in a place shaped by drops. And as we move from the sunlit plain into the first hidden openings, the Nullarbor Karst maze begins to show how rainwater turns absence into architecture. The first layer below the surface is not a grand cavern yet. It is a zone of small spaces, pockets, cracks, and softened edges where the limestone has learned to let water through. You can picture your hand resting on pale stone, feeling its dryness above, while beneath that dryness, a network of damp memory continues to widen. The air has a faint mineral taste, cool and clean. Here, rainwater doesn't travel like a river. It filters. It disappears through the skin of the plain, finding tiny openings between grains and fractures left by pressure, uplift, and old settling. We are following a downward seep, a slow migration from brightness into shade. Each molecule of water touches the limestone and leaves changed, carrying away a little dissolved stone. This is the beginning of Karst. It is a landscape made by dissolving, by subtraction, by the quiet removal of what once seemed solid. You can think of it as a sculpture made from patience rather than force. The Nullarbor Karst maze formed because the rock was soluble, the plain was broad, and rain kept returning. Even when it returns softly, the surface gives almost nothing away. There are no great rivers crossing much of the Nullarbor, because water often sinks before it gathers enough strength to run above ground. It vanishes through fissures and low depressions, leaving the land dry, quiet, and open. Beneath that apparent emptiness, the water continues its work in secret. You can feel the contrast as we drift lower. Above us, wind moves over the plain with a dry, papery sound. Below us, the sound thins until it becomes a hush pressed into stone. The light from the entrance fades from white to honey, then to grey, then to a blue so faint it feels like memory. The limestone walls hold a coolness that seems older than the day. Rainwater follows gravity, but it also follows chemistry. As it passes through soil and air, it gathers carbon dioxide and becomes weak carbonic acid, just strong enough to loosen limestone grain by grain. This is not destruction in the dramatic sense. It is more like a long conversation between water and rock, each drop asking the stone to yield a little. Over thousands and then millions of years, these small exchanges create pathways. Some pathways stay narrow, just damp lines in the rock. Others widen into tubes and low corridors where air can move. Some become caves large enough to hold silence like a room. In the Nullarbor Karst maze, shape comes from repetition, and repetition becomes wonder. You may notice how calm this kind of formation feels. Nothing needs to happen quickly. The landscape does not announce itself. It lets rain enter, lets stone dissolve, lets hollows join one another beneath the plain. The comfort of it is in the scale, because a single quiet process can make an entire hidden world. And as we sink a little deeper through these softened joints, the water paths widen, and the maze begins to breathe beneath the Nullarbor. The next spaces feel cooler and more complete. We are no longer at the skin of the plain, but inside the pale body of the limestone, where passages gather darkness and hold it gently. The walls might be rough in some places, and smooth in others, depending on how water moved through them. You can imagine touching the stone and feeling a satin dampness under your fingertips. The Nullarbor Karst maze is not one simple tunnel. It is a pattern of chambers, tubes, shafts, sealed hollows, and hidden voids, each shaped by water finding a slightly different route. Rainwater rarely takes a straight line. It bends through fractures, spreads along bedding plains, pools where the stone resists, and deepens where the stone yields. We follow it like a thought going inward. Some passages grow wider because more water arrives there. Others become abandoned when conditions change, left dry and still, holding mineral traces of an older flow. This is how a maze forms without any intention behind it. There is only slope, chemistry, rock texture, and time. Yet, when you picture it from within, it feels almost deliberate, as if the earth has folded a quiet map into itself. The air in these cavities is different from the air above. It is cooler, calmer, and touched with limestone. Sound arrives softly and then disappears. If a drop falls from the ceiling, it may travel through the dark for a moment before meeting the floor with a small, rounded note. That one sound can make the whole chamber feel larger. In places, dissolved limestone returns as decoration. Water-carrying minerals reaches open air inside a cave, loses a little carbon dioxide, and leaves calcite behind. Drop by drop, the stone grows again. A stalactite lengthens from above, while a stalagmite rises from below, and between them the chamber keeps its slow breathing. You can see them in your mind without needing bright light. Pale ribbons, soft columns, flowstone like frozen fabric along the wall. These forms are Rainwater's second act, after dissolving the maze and then rebuilding small ornaments inside it. The same water that opens the void can also line it with quiet brightness. Because the Nullarbor is dry above, these formations may grow with extraordinary slowness. A thin drip might pause for long seasons, waiting for another rain to recharge the cracks above. That waiting becomes part of the place. It gives every mineral surface a feeling of restraint, as if the cave has learned to keep still between visits from water. We are moving with that stillness now. Your body can rest into it, because the stone is not asking anything from you. The dark passage simply continues, shaped by rain, held by limestone, and cooled by the buried calm of the plain. Even the idea of distance begins to soften here, and as we drift onward through the widening Nullarbor Karst maze, the surface falls farther behind, and the old sea inside the stone comes closer. The limestone around us was once marine, and that matters. The Nullarbor Karst maze exists because an ancient ocean made the material that rain would later carve. Shells and microscopic remains settled into layers, compressed into rock, and rose into dry land after seas withdrew. Now, when you move through these caves in imagination, you are moving through an old seabed lifted into silence. There is something gentle in that reversal. A place that once held waves now holds darkness. A stone made from sea life now shelters air, roots, minerals, and hidden water. You can almost smell the faint salt in the idea of it, though the cave itself smells more like damp chalk, cool dust, and stone. Rainwater did not make the limestone, but it revealed what limestone could become. It entered the old marine layers and followed their weakness. Some beds dissolved faster than others, so passages widened unevenly. In some places, ceilings held firm. In others, chambers expanded until the ground above sagged or opened. At the surface, these openings may appear as sinkholes, dolines, or cave entrances, quiet interruptions in the flatness. You might approach one across the plain and feel the air change before you see the depth. The warmth loosens. A cooler breath rises from below. The smell shifts from sunlit dust to shaded mineral damp, and suddenly the Nullarbor is no longer flat at all. These surface windows remind us that the maze is alive in a geological sense. Not alive like an animal, but active, responsive, slowly adjusting to water, gravity, and the weight of its own roof. Rain falls, seeps, dissolves, drains, evaporates, and returns. The land listens by changing shape in silence. You can imagine standing at the rim of a doline as evening settles. The light becomes amber on the limestone, and the shadow below gathers in layers. A bird call may pass above and fade quickly into the wide air. Down inside the opening, the cave holds a cooler, dark, patient, and undisturbed, waiting for the next soft rain. Below the opening, breakdown blocks may rest where a ceiling once gave way. Their edges are softened by time. Dust lies on them in pale films. Minerals may coat their sides where water trickled after the collapse. Even collapse here does not need to feel violent. It can be understood as the slow settling of a very old room. The Nullarbor Karst maze is full of these relationships between the visible and hidden plane. A shallow hollow at the surface may connect to a deeper cavity. A narrow fissure may lead toward a chamber no light has entered for ages. We move through this idea carefully, feeling how vastness can exist under something that looks empty. And as we leave the rim light behind, the maze draws us inward again, where rainwater collects, lingers, and writes its history on the walls. Inside the deeper part of the Nullarbor Karst maze, water becomes less like weather and more like memory. It gathers in small hollows, waits in narrow cups of stone, and slides through unseen fractures with a softness you would barely hear. We follow it with your breathing slow and your attention loose, while the walls around us hold the cool smell of limestone. The darkness here is not empty, but layered. A single drop may have crossed a great distance before reaching this passage. It may have fallen onto dry plain, soaked through a thin skin of soil, and touched roots, dust, old salt, and broken shell grains. By the time it reaches the cave, it carries the chemistry of the surface in quiet solution. You can imagine it arriving at the ceiling above us, swelling slowly, shining once, and falling. When that drop lands, it is only a small sound. Yet in this maze, small sounds have room to travel. The note touches the wall, fades behind a bend, and returns as almost nothing. You and I listen because the sound tells us how the cave was made. It tells us water is still moving through the Nullarbor, even when the plain above looks still and dry. Rainwater writes on stone in two directions. First it removes, dissolving limestone along hidden weaknesses until a passage appears. Then it adds, leaving mineral skin where the water slows and air touches it. In the Nullarbor Karst maze, these two gestures meet inside the same darkness, and the cave becomes both hollow and adorned. You can feel that balance as a kind of slow breathing. The walls may show scallops where water once flowed with more force, shallow curved marks that record the direction of an older current. They may show pale curtains of calcite, thin enough in your imagination to glow at the edges when light passes behind them. They may show stains from iron, clay, or ancient organic matter. Each mark is part of the Nullarbor's patience. We don't need to read the wall quickly. We can let it pass beside us like a long, quiet shoreline. A darker band may show where water once stood. A smooth tube may tell of flow under pressure when a passage was filled and the water moved as one enclosed body. Later, when the level dropped, air entered and the room learned silence. Below this, the water changes again, and we move into the part of the Nullarbor Karst maze where dryness above and dampness below begin to speak to each other. The Nullarbor Plain is famous for openness. You can stand there beneath a wide sky and feel the horizon pull your thoughts outward, in every direction. Yet the rain that falls onto that openness often refuses to stay visible. It sinks almost immediately, slipping past the thin surface and entering the limestone body below. That disappearance is the first quiet lesson of the Nullarbor Karst maze, the lesson of vanishing. You may picture a shower passing over the plain at dusk. The air cools, the dust scent rises, and low plants shine for a while under a dimming sky. There may be no stream forming, no bright surface water hurrying away. Instead, the rain finds cracks, small sink points, and softened hollows. It enters the ground as if the plain is drinking without sound. This matters because surface rivers carve valleys, but disappearing water carves inward. The Nullarbor is not shaped by rushing streams in the ordinary way. It is shaped by infiltration, by seepage, by the hidden widening of stone under a land that looks almost level. We drift with that hidden movement now, under the apparent simplicity of the plain. Your body can settle into the idea of water moving where eyes cannot follow. The dry climate does not prevent karst from forming. It simply slows the rhythm, stretching each change across longer intervals. Rain may arrive unevenly, and long dry periods may pause the chemistry, but every return of water continues the work. The Nullarbor Karst maze is a record of persistence under restraint. It teaches us how little is needed if time is generous. When water sinks through the upper limestone, it enters a zone sometimes called the epikarst, where the rock is fractured, weathered, and uneven. This zone stores water briefly, like a hidden sponge made of stone. Some water evaporates or is taken by roots, and some continues downward. We follow the portion that descends, cool and faintly charged, toward the larger passages below. You can feel the temperature changing as we go. The surface heat becomes distant. The air steadies around us, and the smell shifts toward damp chalk and old mineral dust. The light grows less certain, even if a faint entrance glow remains somewhere behind us. The cave ahead has a darkness with its own calm weight. It rests on the skin like a blanket. The upper passages may be interrupted by tight bends and low ceilings. Water found these routes because the rock allowed it, not because the route was easy. You and I imagine moving gently through them without strain, as if we were the water itself. We slip along cracks, widen with the bedding, and pause where the ceiling lowers. The cave teaches movement by softness, and as the last warmth of the surface fades behind us, the maze opens again, and the rain's long path begins to reveal older chambers below. In these older chambers of the Nullarbor Karst maze, the stone feels less newly touched and more deeply remembered. The ceilings rise away into darkness, and the floor may be uneven with fallen blocks, pale sediment, and slow mineral sheets. You might hear your own breath as a soft presence beside the drip of water. We are small here, but not unwelcome. The space is simply vast. Large chambers often form where several pathways meet, or where limestone was especially open to dissolution. Water moving through fractures can merge, spread sideways, and dissolve the walls into broader cavities. Over time, ceilings may arch naturally where the rock holds, while weaker sections settle downward. The result is not a designed hall, but it can feel like one when you stand in it quietly. You can imagine the beam of a gentle light moving across the chamber, not sharply, but slowly enough for the walls to appear from darkness and return again. Pale calcite gleams in places. Shadows collect behind boulders. A slope of fine sediment descends toward a lower passage, as if the cave floor itself is easing us onward. The Nullarbor Karst maze keeps guiding us down. Rainwater shaped these rooms indirectly, as well as directly. It dissolved the original voids, carried sediment inward, and changed the stability of ceilings by removing support over long periods. It also brought minerals that cemented some surfaces and left others fragile. Nothing here is separate from water. Even the dry stone is part of a water story that has paused. A chamber can preserve climates long gone. Mineral deposits inside caves often grow in relation to rainfall, evaporation, temperature, and the chemistry of water above. When conditions change, the cave records those changes in layers too fine for a sleepy mind to count, but easy to feel as depth. You and I don't need the numbers. We can sense the ancient layering. Some calcite surfaces may have grown during wetter periods, when more water moved through the limestone. Other times may have left gaps, dust, or darker films. The Nullarbor Karst maze is therefore not only a place, but a quiet archive. Rainwater kept bringing news from the surface, and the cave kept it in stone. Every drip was a message, softened by time. If you rest your imagination on a stalagmite, you can picture it rising from a floor where drops have fallen for ages. Its surface may be rounded, ribbed, or faintly glossy. It grows upward, not by effort, but by receiving. A drop arrives, leaves a trace, and disappears. Another follows after a pause. The shape becomes a meditation in waiting, and as we leave the high chamber and follow the slope beyond it, the Nullarbor Karst maze narrows again, as though the old rain wants us to listen more closely. The narrower passages feel more intimate. The ceiling lowers, the walls come nearer, and the air seems to move with greater care. You can imagine brushing a hand along the limestone and feeling small hollows where water once curled and pressed. There is a soft coolness against your skin, and a dry mineral scent underneath the damp. We continue gently, with the maze close around us. In a passage like this, the shape of the rock can reveal the way water moved. A round tube may have formed when the passage was completely filled, allowing water to dissolve evenly around its walls. A canyon-like slot may have deepened later, after water levels fell and a stream or seep cut downward through the floor. The Nullarbor Karst maze contains these older positions of water, stacked like quiet memories. You may notice that the cave has no hurry in its pattern. It widens, narrows, bends, pauses, and opens again, following the deep logic of fractures and bedding planes. Rainwater did not choose a path once. It kept choosing, or rather being guided, by the stone's smallest allowances. We can feel that in the passage, where each curve seems to have been made by permission. The science is gentle here, because it is mostly the science of contact. Water touches calcite, carries away ions, and leaves space behind. More water touches more calcite, and the space becomes connected to other spaces. The acidity is weak, but the repetition is immense. The cave is not made by one event, but by a nearly endless sequence of quiet meetings. Above the cave, soil and sparse vegetation influence the water as well. Roots add carbon dioxide to the ground air, and decaying organic matter changes the chemistry of water moving through the upper layers. Even in a dry landscape, the living surface contributes to the hidden dissolving below. You can picture a low plant on the plain, silvered by night, quietly participating in the formation of a cave. This connection between surface and depth gives the Nullarbor Karst maze a softness that pure stone alone would not have. Rain, air, roots, dust, salt, shells, and limestone all take part. You and I are following a relationship rather than a tunnel. The passage around us is the shape made when those quiet things met again and again across deep time. The life here is subtle. Some small cave dwellers may live in darkness, adapted to stillness, moisture, and limited food. Tiny invertebrates can move through cracks and sediments, feeding on organic traces washed in from above. They are not dramatic creatures. They belong to the hush, making a living from crumbs of energy that rain and air carry down.
When you picture them, picture smallness first. Pale bodies, slow movements, delicate antennae tasting the dark. Life in a karst maze often depends on what arrives from the surface, and rainwater is one of the quiet carriers. It brings dissolved matter, fine particles, and sometimes the faintest traces of leaves or soil. In darkness, even a little becomes enough. And as the passage bends and the air grows cooler, we move toward places where the cave seems to breathe with the plain above. The Nullarbor karst maze is known in places for breaths of air rising from the ground, as if the limestone itself is exhaling. These movements are often felt near openings, blowholes, cracks, or cave entrances, where pressure differences guide air through hidden passages.
You might stand on the plain and feel a cool draft against your ankle. It would be the dark below saying here. That breath is part of the maze's connection to weather. As temperature and air pressure shift above the Nullarbor, air inside the caves may move in response. Warm surface air, cool cave air, changing winds and barometric pressure all help the hidden system inhale and exhale through its openings. We can imagine that movement now as a slow pulse in the dark, not loud, just present. Inside a passage, the draft may be barely noticeable. It might brush your face with coolness, carrying the smell of damp limestone from a chamber farther in. Sometimes the air feels still for a long while, then begins to move so gently that you notice it only because a drop sound travels differently. The Nullarbor karst maze has its own weather, muted and underground. Air movement matters because it shapes the cave after water has done its first work. It affects evaporation, mineral growth, moisture, and the preservation of surfaces. A drier passage may develop different textures than a humid chamber. A steady draft may slow condensation or encourage crystals in one place and dust in another. The cave continues becoming itself through small exchanges. You can feel how everything here is reciprocal. Rainwater opens the stone. The openings allow air to move. Moving air changes mineral deposition, and the changed surfaces guide later moisture. Nothing is isolated. The Nullarbor karst maze is a system of patient feedback, a quiet conversation among water, rock, air, and time. We are listening from inside that conversation. At the surface, a blowhole may appear as an unassuming crack or small hole in the limestone. It may be surrounded by dry earth, low scrub, and the bright emptiness of the plain. Yet beneath it, passages may reach outward in several directions, invisible from above. A little air moving through that opening can hint at a large hollow world below. For a sleepy listener, there is comfort in that hidden scale. The world does not need to show all of itself at once. Some places remain folded inward, discovered only by breath, coolness, and the patience to notice. You and I let that idea settle as we move deeper, following the draft back into darkness. The air becomes our guide when water is absent. And below the breathing cracks, the Nullarbor karst maze holds older traces of water, where former pools and passages remember levels that have changed. In some lower places, the floor may become smoother, and the walls may show lines where water once rested. These marks can feel like shorelines inside the earth. You can imagine standing beside one, seeing a faint band curve across the limestone, and knowing that water once filled the passage to that height. The cave keeps those still levels like memories. Groundwater in karst landscapes can rise, fall, and move through connected openings according to climate, sea level, recharge, and the shape of the rock. On the Nullarbor, the relationship between dry surface and hidden water has changed over long spans of time. Rainfall patterns shifted. Sea levels changed along the distant coast. The caves responded slowly, as all deep systems do. A passage that is dry now may once have carried water. A chamber holding air now may have been partly flooded. A lower conduit may still be connected to hidden groundwater, even if the surface above gives no sign. You and I follow these changes not as a timeline to memorize, but as a sensation of rising and falling quietness inside the stone. Water leaves different textures depending on how it stays. Flowing water may smooth a wall or carve scallops. Standing water may deposit fine sediment, create level stains, or allow certain minerals to settle. Dripping water builds speleothems, while evaporating water may leave crusts. The Nullarbor karst maze contains all these soft signatures, each one shaped by the behavior of water. You can picture a former pool in a chamber where the floor dips gently. The surface would have been black and still, reflecting the ceiling in a wavering mirror. A drop from above would strike it with a small ring, and the ring would widen until it touched stone. Then the pool would become still again, as if nothing had happened. In darkness, water often feels deeper than it is. It gathers the cave above itself and holds it upside down. Your mind can rest on that image, because it is quiet and complete. Rainwater that once entered from far above has now become a dark mirror underground, and the Nullarbor karst maze seems to look inward through it. Where pools persist or where moisture remains stable, small ecosystems may form. They depend on darkness, mineral surfaces, and the faint delivery of nutrients from above. Cave life is usually modest in size, but rich in adaptation. You might imagine tiny animals moving slowly through damp sediment or water films, guided by touch, chemistry, and the steady coolness around them. These hidden lives remind us that even an austere landscape is not empty. The Nullarbor may look bare under the sun, but its karst maze can hold quiet habitats in sheltered spaces below. Rainwater connects them to the surface, bringing what little nourishment arrives. In a place of restraint, life becomes careful, economical, and beautifully still, and as we drift past the old water lines, the maze leads us toward sediments that fell, washed and settled through openings in the plain. The floor beneath us changes from bare stone to fine material. It may be pale dust, reddish earth, sand, clay, or a mixture carried in by water and gravity. Each deposit has its own softness underfoot in your imagination, muffling sound and smoothing the cave's hard edges. The Nullarbor karst maze is not only carved into limestone, it is also partly filled by arrival. Rainwater brings sediment in small ways. It washes particles from the surface into cracks, sinkholes, and entrances. It carries clay through narrow fissures and leaves it where water slows. Wind-blown dust may settle on the plain and later be drawn downward by wet seasons. Over time, the cave floor becomes a quiet archive of what the surface has shed. You can imagine a slope of sediment below an entrance where material has fallen inward season after season. At the top, it may be dry and powdery. Deeper down, it may hold moisture and compact into soft layers. A small trickle might cut a shallow channel through it after rain, then vanish again into a crack at the base. These deposits affect how water continues to shape the cave. Sediment can block one route and guide flow into another. Clay can hold moisture against limestone, encouraging slow dissolution in places where clean air might have dried the surface. Loose material can be moved, sorted, and rearranged by each new recharge event. The maze continues to adjust around what it receives. In a karst system, absence and filling are always balanced. Cavities open, then collect sediment. Passages widen, then narrow as clay or breakdown accumulates. Entrances form, then change shape. The Nullarbor karst maze is never a single finished object. It is a slow arrangement of void and matter, of space made and space gently softened again. The colors here can be subdued but beautiful. Pale cream limestone, reddish dust from the surface, brown clay in a damp hollow, a white mineral crust catching faint light along a ledge. You can see these colors without brightness, as if the cave offers them only quietly. They are earth tones held under the plain, muted by darkness and time. Sediments also carry traces of life. Plant fragments, pollen, charcoal from ancient natural fires, animal remains, and fine organic matter may enter caves and rest in protected conditions. We do not need to dwell on any one trace. It is enough to know the surface has been visiting the depths in fragments, carried by rain, wind, gravity, and chance. As you relax into this hidden landscape, the cave floor becomes less like ground and more like a slow settling. Everything that falls here stays longer than it would under open sky. Dust is not blown away. Water does not rush far. The stillness gathers materials and keeps them.
letting the Nullarbor remember itself from below. And as the sediment slope levels out, we move farther into the Nullarbor Karst maze, where rainwater has carved not downward alone, but sideways through the old sea stone. Sideways movement is one of the quiet secrets of Karst. Water enters from above, but once it meets a bedding plane or a less permeable layer, it can spread laterally through the limestone. It follows the thin horizontal lines of the ancient seabed, widening them into low rooms and broad passages. You and I move along one now, with the ceiling close and the floor gently even. This kind of passage carries the memory of layers. The limestone was deposited in beds, and those beds became natural guides for water long after the sea withdrew. Where one layer was slightly more soluble, fractured, or open, water found an easier path. Over long time, that path widened into a corridor. The Nullarbor Karst maze is therefore partly a map of ancient deposition. You can picture the walls as pages in a thick, pale book. Each layer was once sediment on a seafloor. Each line has a different texture, grain, and weakness. Rainwater reads those differences by touch. It does not need intelligence to choose, because chemistry and gravity are enough. The result feels intricate, but its making is quiet and simple. In a broad horizontal passage, sound becomes soft and spread out. Your footsteps would be muted by sediment, and your breath would seem to travel ahead of you. The air might carry a faint, cool draft from a farther chamber. The ceiling may hold small domes where trapped air and water shaped upward pockets. Everything feels low, calm, and held. Sometimes water dissolves upward into the ceiling along fractures, creating bell-like hollows or blind pockets. Sometimes it dissolves downward, cutting small channels into the floor. Sometimes it widens both walls until the passage becomes a gallery. These differences depend on flow, water chemistry, sediment, and the shape of the limestone. The cave is a record of conditions, not a random emptiness. As we drift through this gallery, you may sense how the Nullabor's flat surface and its layered subsurface belong together. The plain above is wide because of broad geological history, and the passages below spread because the rock itself is bedded and extensive. The maze is not separate from the landscape. It is the landscape turned inward. There is comfort in that inwardness. A surface can seem blank until you understand what it shelters. A quiet person can hold a deep inner world, and a quiet plain can hold chambers beneath its stillness. We keep moving softly, letting the comparison remain gentle. The Nullarbor Karst maze asks for no drama, only attention, and as the horizontal passage slowly descends again, the floor dips toward cooler air, and the old rain paths gather into a darker branch of the maze. This darker branch feels older, though age in a cave is never simple. Some surfaces may be ancient, while others were altered by water not very long ago in geological terms. The Nullarbor Karst maze is made of overlapping times, with young mineral skins coating older walls and fresh dust resting on very old stone. You and I move through these layers without needing to sort them all. The feeling here is one of deep quiet. The temperature remains steady. The air carries little scent beyond mineral dampness and a faint earth note from sediments behind us. If there is water nearby, it is hidden, but you may hear it in a soft periodic drip. Each sound arrives, expands, and disappears into the dark. Rainwater shaped this branch by exploiting a fracture that may have existed long before dissolution widened it. The fracture could have formed from stress in the limestone, from regional uplift, or from subtle movements as the rock settled over time. Water entered that weakness and enlarged it. Many karst mazes begin this way, as geology offers a line, and rainwater patiently follows. You can imagine the fracture at its beginning, narrow and barely open. A drop enters. Another follows. The sides become slightly etched. The crack admits more water during wet periods. Dissolved limestone leaves with the flow. The opening becomes large enough for air, then for more water, then for a passage. This is how a hidden line becomes a place. In the Nullarbor, the scale of the plain allows many such lines to exist. Some connect, some remain isolated, some lead toward larger chambers, while others end in tight pockets filled with sediment. The maze is not a single neat plan. It is a branching result of countless small opportunities taken by water.
Yet from inside, it feels quietly inevitable. Because rainfall is limited, the cave may spend much of its time in pause. Pause is not emptiness. It is the interval when carbon dioxide balances, minerals dry, air rests, and small creatures remain tucked into damp refuges. When rain returns, the system wakes without hurry. Water seeps in, not as an alarm, but as a continuation. You can let your breathing match that pattern. Inhale, like the cave taking in cool air through a blowhole. Exhale, like dampness moving along a wall. Rest in the pause between. The Nullarbor Karst maze has been doing this longer than any listener can imagine, and its rhythm is broader than our own, but it can still feel familiar. And as we follow the fracture-born passage farther inward, we begin to sense the coast in the distance, not as sound, but as history held inside the limestone. The Nullarbor lies near the southern edge of Australia, where the land eventually meets the Southern Ocean, and that distant marine presence matters to the Karst. The limestone itself came from ancient seas, and changing sea levels have influenced groundwater and cave development over time. Even far inside the plain, the Nullarbor Karst maze carries a subtle coastal memory. You do not need to hear waves for that memory to be present. It is in the shell fragments that became stone. It is in the flatness of the old marine platform. It is in the way groundwater may respond, over long scales, to base levels set beyond the visible horizon. The cave holds the sea in transformed form, muted and cooled by rock. Rainwater falling inland moves downward through limestone, but its ultimate pathways may be shaped by the broader drainage system and the position of groundwater. Where fresh water meets older saline water, chemistry can become more complex. Mixing waters can dissolve limestone differently from either water alone. In some karst regions, this mixing helps enlarge cavities in quiet, hidden zones. On the Nullarbor, the interaction of arid surface conditions, marine limestone, and groundwater history gives the maze its particular character. We can imagine water moving through zones of different chemistry, softening the rock where conditions allow. The process is delicate, not dramatic. It is like the cave being shaped by the meeting of memories. The air around us remains still, but the idea of ancient water makes the passage feel wider. Rain from the sky, water held in rock, sea levels beyond the coast, and mineral traces from old marine life all gather inside this hidden system. You and I are moving through a place where surface and ocean, past and present, dry plain and damp cave have never been fully separate. Sometimes cave passages preserve clues of former water tables, horizontal levels, wall notches, corrosion surfaces, and sediment benches can all suggest where water spent time. These features may be quiet to look at, but they are powerful in meaning. They show that the Nullarbor Karst maze has been rearranged as water levels shifted through long climatic and geological change. You can picture a wall where a smooth band runs evenly around the chamber. It is not bright or decorative. It is a line of former stillness, a place where water lingered long enough to make its presence known. Standing beside it in imagination, you feel how even a silent level can become a lasting mark on stone. And as we pass that old water mark, the maze leads us toward a place where the ceiling lowers and the sound of dripping becomes slower, softer, and farther apart. Here, the drip intervals are long enough that you begin to anticipate them and then forget them. A drop gathers above, unseen in the dark. It grows from seepage along a crack, swells with mineral water, and waits until gravity is enough. Then it falls, touches stone, and leaves a small ring of calcite behind. The Nullarbor Karst maze counts time in drops. A dripstone can feel almost alive because it grows from repeated contact. Yet its life is mineral, quiet, and unconcerned with speed. The drop that falls now may be separated from the next by seconds, minutes, or much longer intervals, depending on rain, storage above, and evaporation along the way. Growth may almost pause during dry phases, then resume when water returns. You can imagine sitting near a stalagmite without needing to measure it. Its shape is rounded and calm, a pale form rising from the floor where countless drops have landed. Each drop left an invisible film of calcite, and each film became part of the whole. The result is a slow column of rainfall turned to stone. In this way, rainwater shapes the Nullarbor Karst maze, even after the hollow spaces are formed. It decorates, seals, strengthens and records. It makes delicate straws from ceilings and thicker columns where water is abundant enough. It smooths flowstone over slopes like frozen cream, following gravity in folds and sheets. The cave becomes a museum of water's gestures. The chemistry behind these forms is simple enough to feel. Water dissolves limestone when it holds carbon dioxide. Later, when it enters a cave and releases some of that gas into the air, calcite can precipitate. Dissolving and depositing are two sides of the same quiet movement. The cave is hollowed by one breath and adorned by the next. Your own breath seems softer when you think of it that way. The cave air holds invisible balances, and the minerals respond to balances too small to notice directly. Nothing here needs a sharp boundary. Water becomes stone, stone becomes solution, solution becomes decoration, and decoration becomes a record of rain. The Nullarbor Karst maze rests inside that cycle. Some formations may be translucent when thin, holding a faint honey color under light. Others may be opaque white, tan, or gently stained by trace minerals. Their surfaces can be glossy, matte, ribbed, or rippled. You can imagine them without hurry, letting your attention move from one to another like a slow hand along a shelf. And as the last drip fades behind us, we move deeper into a passage where the limestone shows the quiet work of air, dryness, and evaporation. Dryness has its own way of shaping a cave. In parts of the Nullarbor Karst maze, air movement and arid conditions can slow dripping and encourage evaporation from damp surfaces. When water evaporates, minerals may remain behind as crusts, crystals, or powdery coatings. You might see a pale bloom on stone, delicate and soft. These evaporative textures are different from the steady growth of a stalactite. They may form where water seeps thinly through a wall and dries before it can fall. They may gather around cracks, ledges, or sheltered pockets where air lingers. The dry surface world above the Nullarbor influences these hidden mineral skins, reminding us again that the cave and plain are joined. You can feel that dryness in the air here. It is cool, but not heavy. It touches the throat lightly, carrying the mineral scent of limestone and a faint dusty edge. The walls may be mostly dry, with only occasional darker patches where moisture still arrives. We move carefully through this balance of dampness and aridity, letting the cave remain quiet. Rainwater is still the source, even where evaporation dominates. It enters, dissolves, travels, seeps, and then vanishes into air, leaving behind the substances it carried. In this way, even disappearing water becomes visible. It leaves a trace of its path as mineral film. The Nullarbor Karst maze is full of such traces, some obvious, some almost invisible. The science here is not separate from the feeling. Evaporation cools surfaces and concentrates minerals. Airflow changes where moisture lingers. Carbon dioxide levels influence whether limestone dissolves or calcite forms. Each condition nudges the cave in a particular direction. We do not need to hold every detail at once, because the whole process has a single gentle theme. That theme is transformation by small difference. Slightly wetter here, slightly drier there. A little more carbon dioxide in one seep, a little more airflow in another passage. Over time, those slight differences become textures, shapes, corridors, chambers, and crusts. The Nullarbor Karst maze is a landscape made by quiet variations multiplied across ages. As you drift with the passage, the walls appear less like boundaries and more like participants. They take water in, give minerals back, respond to air, hold marks from older flows, and shelter small damp places where life can persist. The stone is not active in a human way. It is responsive in a geological way, which is slower and calmer. And as the dry passage curves toward a darker hollow, we enter a place where fallen stone reminds us that caves also change by settling. The floor becomes rougher now, with blocks lying where parts of the ceiling have loosened across long spans of time. These stones may look heavy, but in our slow imagining they feel settled rather than dramatic. Dust softens their edges. Mineral films join them to the floor in places. The Nullarbor Karst maze accepts its fallen pieces into the whole. Breakdown happens when a cavity becomes large enough, or when fractures, bedding planes, and gravity work together over time. Water may weaken supports by dissolving limestone along joints. Drying, wetting, mineral change, and subtle stress can all contribute. Eventually, some rock separates and comes to rest below. The cave floor rises a little, and the chamber shape changes. You can see how even this belongs to rainwater's story. Rain dissolves the walls and ceilings first, creating the void. Later, rainwater moving along cracks may help loosen blocks or alter the surfaces around them. After stone falls, water flows around it, deposits minerals on it, and carries sediment into the spaces between. Nothing is outside the slow process. A breakdown chamber has a different sound. Footsteps, if we imagined them, would be broken and muted. Drops might strike stone at many levels, some high on a block, some low in a crack. The air would move around the fallen shapes in gentle eddies. The darkness would gather under overhangs, soft and thick. There is a peacefulness in seeing the cave incorporate change. What falls is not lost. It becomes part of the floor, part of the path, part of the drainage pattern. New small cavities form between blocks. Sediment fills some gaps and leaves others open. Rainwater continues to pass through, finding its way with the same old patience. The Nullarbor Karst maze is therefore not a fixed maze drawn once beneath the plain. It is a slow rearrangement. Passages open and close, entrances form and soften, chambers grow, settle, and fill. Water changes direction when a route is blocked, and the cave's pattern becomes more intricate. You and I move through this rearrangement gently, without needing an end. The fallen blocks can also reveal fresh surfaces for dissolution. Their cracks may collect water. Their undersides may shelter dampness. Their edges may become rounded over immense time. In darkness, even a block lying still is part of motion, because the cave's motion is almost too slow to see. It asks us to trust slowness. And as we pass between the settled stones, the maze lowers toward a cooler pocket where the air feels more humid and the scent of water returns. The change is subtle at first. The mineral dust in the air softens. The limestone walls darken slightly where moisture touches them. A faint smell rises, not strong, but clean and earthy, like rain stored far from sunlight. In this part of the Nullarbor Karst maze, water is near enough for the dark to feel smooth. A humid pocket may form where airflow is limited and seepage remains steady. Water arriving from above can maintain damp surfaces, especially after rainfall has passed through the epikarst and deeper fractures. Evaporation slows in enclosed chambers. The result is a little refuge of moisture, held under a land often described by dryness. You can feel the contrast as a gentle coolness on your skin. These moist places matter for cave ecosystems. Tiny organisms may use damp walls, sediments or pools. Microbial films can develop where water and minerals meet. Small invertebrates may find shelter in cracks or move across wet surfaces in search of scarce food. We keep our attention soft, noticing that life here is quiet, delicate, and adapted to less. Food in caves often comes from outside. Rainwater can carry dissolved organic carbon, fine particles, pollen, soil matter, and other traces into the dark. Roots may enter some upper spaces. Animals near entrances can bring nutrients. But deeper in the Nullarbor Karst maze, energy is limited, and life responds by becoming slower, smaller, and careful. You might imagine a pale cave creature pausing on damp sediment. It does not need eyes in the way surface animals do. It senses through touch, vibration, and chemistry. Its world is close, dark, and cool. It belongs to the cave's pace, where movement is measured and nothing wastes effort. There is comfort in such careful belonging. The life here does not interrupt the geology. It rests inside it. The cave provides humidity, darkness,
stable temperature, and surfaces shaped by rainwater.
In return, living things add minute traces to the system, tiny changes in organic matter and microbial activity. The Nullarbor Karst maze holds them quietly, as it holds water, air, and stone. For the listener, this hidden ecology can feel like a reminder that unseen places are not empty places. There are whole worlds that do not ask to be bright. They continue in coolness, in patience, in a darkness that protects rather than threatens. You and I can drift past them with respect, leaving the humid pocket undisturbed. And as the damp air slowly thins again, the passage rises a little, then turns downward through another joint opened by rain. The joint is narrow at first, like a vertical line drawn through the limestone. Water entered it because it was already a weakness, perhaps opened by stress long before the first drop passed through. Over ages, that weakness became a root. The Nullarbor Karst maze is full of such beginnings, where a small line in stone becomes a pathway. We follow it slowly, imagining the walls close on either side, pale and faintly rough. Moisture may bead in one place and vanish in another. The air cools as the passage deepens. Above us, the surface plane seems far away now, though every feature around us still depends on it. Rain from that open sky made this inward descent possible. Vertical joints can connect different levels of a cave system. Water moving down them may enlarge shafts, feed lower passages, or create cascades during wetter intervals. In dry times, the same joints may carry only air or occasional seepage. Their importance lies in connection. They allow the maze to become three-dimensional, not just a spread of horizontal rooms. You can imagine water descending through this joint. After rain, it would slide along one wall, gather at ledges, divide into threads, and fall in short drops to the next opening. It might carry dust from above, dissolved limestone from higher levels, and air bubbles caught in its movement. Each visit would slightly change the stone it touched. The Nullarbor Karst maze formed because such connections multiplied. A vertical joint met a horizontal bedding plane. A bedding plane met another fracture. A low corridor connected to a chamber. A chamber opened toward a sinkhole. Across the plane, these connections became a hidden pattern, and the pattern grew through the steady work of rainwater. There is an inward calm to descending through connections. Each level receives us from the last. The cave does not rush the transition. It lets the air change, lets the stone narrow, lets the sound adjust, and then opens again when the rock allows. You can rest inside that rhythm, as if moving from one quiet room of sleep into another. At the bottom of the joint, the floor levels into a passage that may once have carried more water than it carries now. The walls are smoother. The ceiling arches slightly. Fine sediment lies along one side, suggesting slower flow or later settling. We continue with the old water, following the shape it left behind. And as the passage opens into another low chamber, the Nullarbor Karst maze reminds us that even flat landscapes can contain depth beyond seeing. The chamber is broad but not tall, a quiet space pressed between limestone layers. You can imagine lying back in your bed, while the chamber extends around you in thought, low and cool and still. The ceiling is a pale plain above, marked by cracks where water entered. The floor is softened with sediment. Everything here feels under. The surface above may be almost featureless for a long distance, with little to suggest the complexity below. This is one of the gentle marvels of Karst. A plain can look simple because much of its drainage and sculpting has turned inward. The Nullarbor Karst maze hides its intricacy beneath openness, and that contrast gives the landscape its quiet power. Rainwater is the reason the hidden world exists. It turned vertical distance into depth, horizontal weakness into passage, and tiny chemical differences into architecture. It carried the atmosphere into the rock as carbonic acid and returned with dissolved calcium and bicarbonate. It took part of the limestone away, then sometimes brought it back as calcite. The whole maze is rain translated into space. You and I can pause in this chamber and let that idea settle. Rain is usually thought of as something passing, something that arrives and ends. But here, rain has left a form that remains after the clouds are gone. Its passing became permanence. Its softness became rooms. Its modest chemistry became a landscape below the landscape. The chamber's stillness has a sleep-like quality. It is enclosed but not tight, dark but not harsh, silent but not empty. A single drip may fall somewhere beyond sight, giving the space a slow pulse. The air touches the skin evenly. Your thoughts begin to widen and soften, like water spreading through a bedding plane. If we turned our attention upward, we might imagine the entire plain resting above this low chamber, held by columns, arches, and unseen thicknesses of limestone. The weight is real, but the feeling is calm. The earth has carried its own hollows for a very long time. You are simply becoming aware of what it has already been holding. And as the chamber narrows at its far edge, the next passage draws us onward, deeper into the rain-carved quiet beneath the Nullarbor. The passage ahead feels almost like a seam between two memories of water. Above, rain once entered through fine cracks and moved downward in small threads, while here, deeper in the limestone, those threads gathered into a quieter sideways flow. The Nullarbor Karst maze carries that meeting in its shape. You can feel it in the low ceiling, the softened wall, and the cool stillness around us. As we drift forward, the floor tilts so slightly that you might not notice at first. Water would notice. It always notices the smallest slope, the faintest permission, the most delicate change in resistance. A shallow line along the passage floor may have guided flow for a very long time, deepening grain by grain. In a cave, even a nearly level floor can hold a direction. The sound here is subdued. If a drop falls behind us, it arrives as a softened point of sound and then disappears into the bend. If air moves, it does so without insistence, brushing the limestone and carrying a cool mineral scent. The darkness is thick enough to feel restful, but not empty.
It seems to hold the memory of rain. Rainwater shaped the Nullarbor Karst maze through its loyalty to small paths. It did not dissolve all limestone equally, because rock is never perfectly uniform. Some layers were more porous, some fractures opened more easily, some places held water longer, and some allowed it to pass. Over time, those differences became the rooms and passages we are following now. You can picture the passage long before it was wide enough for us to imagine entering. It may have been a thin parting between beds of limestone, hidden beneath the dry plain. After rain, water slipped into it and spread sideways as a narrow film. That film touched stone above and below, and slowly made room for itself. There is a gentle lesson in that kind of making. A path doesn't always begin as a path. Sometimes it begins as a contact, a pause, a repeated return to the same quiet place. The Nullarbor's underground maze is full of those returns, each one small enough to miss, each one adding to a form that becomes vast. And as this seam widens into another chamber, we move with it, letting the rain's old patience open around us again. The chamber beyond is not bright, but it feels spacious after the low passage. Its ceiling lifts into a smooth curve, and the walls draw back in pale, uneven planes. You can imagine standing near the center, hearing your breath settle into the room, while the smell of damp limestone stays close and clean. The Nullarbor Karst maze surrounds us with quiet. A chamber like this may have formed where two or more water routes joined. Each brought slightly acidic water into the same zone, increasing dissolution along intersecting weaknesses. The more space opened, the more water could pass. The more water passed, the more space could open.
It is a slow feedback, not forceful, but steady enough to change the underground plane. You may notice how the chamber has no sharp purpose. It is not a tunnel made for travel or a room made for use. It exists because conditions allowed it to exist. That makes it peaceful. Nothing in the limestone needed to impress anyone. Rainwater arrived, stone yielded, air entered, and the chamber became part of the Nullarbor Karst maze. The walls may show pockets where fossils once weathered differently from surrounding stone. They may hold tiny shell fragments, almost erased by cementation and time. When you imagine them, you are seeing traces of marine life that settled before this place was land.
Rainwater later passed through those traces and carved them into darkness. The old sea and the present sky meet in stone,
In places, the ceiling may be interrupted by a narrow chimney rising beyond sight. Such chimneys can form where water moves upward under pressure, or where dissolution follows vertical fractures. Later, when air replaces water, they remain as dark openings above. You can picture one above us, a small black mouth in the pale rock, breathing faintly with changes from the surface. The air from that chimney might carry dust after dry winds, or cool dampness after rain. It might bring the faintest scent of soil, plants, and sun-warmed limestone from far above. Even deep in the maze, the surface is never completely absent. You and I are learning to sense it indirectly, through drafts, minerals, sediment, and the slow arrival of water. And as we pass beneath the chimney and leave the chamber's center, the cave draws us toward a place where the floor holds soft clay left by older flows. The clay lies in gentle patches, pressed into hollows and smoothed where water once spread across it. In the dimness, it would look darker than the limestone, more earthy, more yielding. You can imagine the feel of it under a careful step, not wet enough to cling, but cool enough to remember moisture. The Nullarbor Karst maze keeps these clay beds as records. Clay can travel far through karst, though slowly and irregularly. Rainwater washes fine particles from the surface into fractures, carries them through narrow passages, and leaves them wherever flow weakens. A small pool may settle them. A blocked root may gather them. A seasonal trickle may spread them in thin sheets along a floor. Each layer tells of movement too quiet to hear. The color of the clay may come from minerals in the surface soil, from iron oxides, from dust carried by wind, or from weathering within the limestone itself. Its presence reminds us that caves are not sealed away from the world above. The plain sends itself downward in fine particles. Rain is the messenger, and gravity is the patient guide. You can imagine one storm after a long dry season. Rain darkens the surface and loosens dust from shallow depressions. A little muddy water slips into a crack, falls through narrow dark, and spreads at last across this low cave floor. When the water drains or evaporates, the clay remains, a thin trace of weather brought underground. Over many such arrivals, the floor changes. Clay may cover older mineral surfaces, protect them, or conceal openings. It may fill small channels, causing later water to seek another way. It may hold moisture against the limestone and continue supple chemical work after the visible flow has gone. The Nullarbor Karst maze is shaped by what water leaves behind as much as by what it removes. The clay also softens sound. In a chamber with a clay floor, a falling drop lands with a duller note. A footstep would not ring. The whole space feels more muffled, as if wrapped in the sediment of the plain. For sleep, it is a comforting texture, a reminder that even hard stone can gather softness. There may be tiny tracks or impressions where small cave creatures have passed, or where water has wrinkled the surface. We do not disturb them. We only imagine the quiet evidence of movement in a place that otherwise seems motionless. The maze is still, but not frozen. It changes in increments that ask for a slower kind of attention, and as the clay thins and bare limestone appears again, we drift toward another branch where the walls narrow into a winding water-carved tube. This tube feels rounded, close and smooth, as if the stone once held a full stream within it. Water moving under pressure can dissolve in all directions, creating a shape more even than an open channel. The Nullarbor Karst maze includes such rounded forms where earlier groundwater filled passages completely. You can feel the old fullness in the curve. A phreatic passage, formed below the water table, does not need air above the flow. The water occupies the entire space, pressing gently against ceiling, walls, and floor. Dissolution happens wherever the chemistry allows. Later, if the water table drops or drainage changes, the passage empties and becomes air-filled. What remains is a rounded corridor. Like a memory of being underwater, you and I move through it as if the old water was still present, not as weight, but as shape. The walls guide us in a soft oval. The ceiling has no sharp edge. The floor may now hold sediment, but the original form still suggests complete immersion. It is one of the ways the Nullarbor Karst maze shows us former depths without speaking. The idea is restful. A space once full of water now holds darkness and air. The water has gone elsewhere, but it left the passage it made. In your bed, you can feel that as a kind of release, as if old pressure has lifted and only the smooth evidence remains. The cave becomes a held exhale. Where the tube bends, the outer wall may be more deeply dissolved, and where flow slowed, pockets may appear. If later trickles cut into the floor, a small trench may run along the bottom of the rounded passage. This creates a shape within a shape, a younger story written inside an older one. Karst often feels like that, time folding into time. Rainwater is still part of the older story, even if groundwater once filled the tube. Recharge from above helped feed the system, carrying carbonic acid into the limestone and maintaining water capable of dissolving stone. The dry plain we crossed in imagination has, across long intervals, supplied the hidden chemistry of the maze. The Nullarbor's rain has been rare in moments, but immense in some. You may notice small ledges along the walls where mineral films accumulated after the passage drained. These ledges can catch dust, clay, or tiny crystals. A drop moving along them may pause before falling. Light would reveal them in a faint sequence, but darkness lets us feel them as quiet interruptions. They are resting places for water's later visits, and as the rounded tube bends downward and opens at its base, we leave the memory of full water and enter a place shaped by trickles after the passage emptied. The floor here is incised by a small channel, narrow and patient, winding along the lowest part of the passage. It may have formed after the water table lowered, when only intermittent flow returned through the old tube. You can imagine rainwater arriving from above, not filling the corridor, but threading along the floor in a shallow line. The sound would be soft. This is Vadose carving, the work of water moving through air-filled caves. It tends to cut downward, following gravity along the passage floor. The stream may be seasonal, occasional, or only present after enough rain has gathered in the upper rock. In the Nullarbor Karst maze, such channels record later phases of drainage, after older cavities had already opened. You can see how the cave changes roles. First, a water-filled tube, then an air-filled passage, then a floor channel carrying later rain. Each stage leaves a form, and none fully erases the others. The limestone becomes a layered memory of water positions. We move through those positions slowly, with your breathing steady and the dark around us kind. The channel may contain little pools in deeper pockets. Their surfaces would be dark and still between flows. Fine sediment could gather in them, and mineral crusts might form along their edges as water evaporates. A drip from the ceiling might disturb one pool with a single ripple. Then the reflection would smooth again. That is how the cave teaches stillness. When rainwater flows here, it may already have traveled a long way through the limestone. It may be saturated with dissolved minerals, or it may still be hungry enough to dissolve more rock, depending on its chemistry and the air it has met. The behavior of the water changes along the route. It is never just water in a simple sense. It is water carrying a history. You and I follow the little channel because it shows the path of the most recent movement. It curves around clay, slips under a ledge, disappears into gravel, and reappears where the floor lowers. It does not need much volume. It only needs return. The Nullarbor Karst maze has been shaped by return more than by force. The edges of the channel are rounded, not sharp. They have known many small flows rather than one sudden cutting. If you placed your hand beside them in imagination, the stone would feel cool and faintly polished. That smoothness is the touch of water repeated beyond counting. It is rain made tactile, and as the small channel disappears beneath a low arch, we drift after the idea of it into another quieter room, where the cave seems to hold its breath. This room has a stillness that feels almost complete. The air barely moves, and the walls are dry in some places, damp in others. The floor is a mixture of limestone, clay, and scattered stones. You can imagine the hush pressing softly against your ears, the way silence in a cave feels thicker than silence under open sky. The Nullarbor Karst maze rests here in pause. Pause is an important part of the process. When there is no rain, dissolution slows. When passages are dry, minerals may stabilize, sediments may settle, and delicate surfaces may remain undisturbed. The cave does not need constant water to keep becoming itself. It also becomes itself in intervals, in the waiting between flows, in the balance between dryness and moisture. For sleep, this waiting is gentle. It gives the mind permission to stop reaching for the next event. The room does not change while you watch it. It changes over timescales too long for watching. You can let go of urgency here, because the Nullarbor Karst maze has never depended on urgency. It depends on repetition, chemistry, and time. The ceiling may hold small cracks darkened by moisture. A few white mineral straws may hang from one line, thin and quiet, like delicate stems of stone. Some may be dry now, waiting for water to return. Others may hold a drop at their tip. A single drop can remain there for a long time before it falls, shining in unseen darkness. These soda straws begin as rings of calcite around drops hanging from the ceiling. Water passes through their hollow centers, leaving a tiny rim of mineral. With repeated dripping, the straw lengthens downward. If its hollow channel becomes blocked, water may run over the outside and thicken it into a stalactite. A slender beginning becomes a heavier form. You can picture the rain's journey through one of those straws. It falls on the Nullarbor Plain, sinks through soil and limestone, enters a crack, travels through darkness, and emerges at last from the end of a hollow mineral tube. It hangs there between stone and air, carrying dissolved limestone back into visible form. Then it lets go. The drop lands below, perhaps on a small mound that may become a stalagmite. Ceiling and floor answer one another over ages. They grow toward each other without hurry. Sometimes they meet, forming a column that connects upper and lower stone. The Nullarbor Karst maze is full of such quiet correspondences, as if rainwater has been drawing lines of connection. And as the room slowly gives way to a descending slope, we leave the suspended drops behind and follow the floor toward a deeper and cooler passage. The slope is made of sediment and fallen limestone, a gentle ramp leading away from the still room. It may have formed from material washed in through an entrance or collapsed from a higher chamber. Your imagined steps become slower here because the surface is uneven but soft. The scent of clay returns, mixed with the cool mineral breath of the Nullarbor Karst maze. Water, moving down a sediment slope, behaves differently from water moving over bare limestone. It can soak in, spread, carry fine particles, and emerge again at the base. It may undercut deposits or leave new layers. It may hide the stone beneath, delaying dissolution in one place while focusing it in another. Even sediment becomes part of the cave's guidance. You can imagine a wet season strong enough to send a trickle down this slope. It would darken the clay first, then gather into small threads between pebbles and blocks. Each thread would carry a little earth from above. At the base, where the slope meets a rock floor, the water might pool briefly, then vanish into a crack. The cave accepts it without sound. Some slopes inside caves build gradually from repeated small entries of material. Others relate to roof fall or ancient surface openings. On the Nullarbor, where the surface can be dry and windblown, dust and soil can wait a long time before rain carries them inward. When it does, the deposit may represent many seasons of quiet accumulation released by one event. There is a slow softness to these deposits. They remind us that not all shaping is carving. Some shaping is covering, filling, smoothing, and muffling. The Nullarbor Karst maze has its hollow grandeur, but it also has these low, earthy places where the surface settles into the depths grain by grain. You can rest in that image of settling. A small creature might move along the edge of the slope, where moisture remains in the sediment after water has drained. Microbes might live in thin films around grains. Roots may not reach this far, but their old influence may arrive as organic traces carried by rain. The cave ecology takes what the surface can spare and turns scarcity into continuity. At the base of the slope, the air feels cooler again. The passage ahead narrows between smoother limestone walls, and the sound of our imagined movement becomes more contained. The maze does not reveal itself all at once. It offers one transition, then another, each shaped by water and waiting. And as we enter the cooler passage, The Nullarbor Karst maze begins to show the influence of ancient levels, where water once lingered longer than it does now. The wall beside us holds a shallow notch, almost level, running farther than our gentle light might reach. It could mark an old water surface, a zone where dissolution concentrated along the contact between air and water, or where standing water changed the limestone. You can imagine tracing it with your eyes, feeling the calm precision of a former level. Water levels in karst systems are not fixed forever. They rise and fall as climate, recharge, drainage, and regional base levels change. In coastal or formerly marine-influenced limestone regions, sea level history can also matter over long times. The Nullarbor Karst maze may preserve traces of such changes in wall features, sediment benches, and altered passage forms. The cave holds old positions of water like lines in a quiet ledger. We do not need to solve each line. It is enough to feel how a level can become architecture. If water stands at a certain height for long enough, chemistry focuses there.
If flow passes along one horizon repeatedly, the horizon widens. If drainage lowers, the old line remains above the new one. The cave becomes a memory palace of water's changing, resting places. The notch feels peaceful because it suggests still water, not rushing. A dark pool might once have filled the passage to that height. Its surface would have reflected the ceiling and swallowed the faintest sound. A drop falling into it would make rings that touched the wall exactly where the notch is now. Then everything would settle again. You can imagine the pool slowly lowering across deep time. As it dropped, it left a wet shine on stone, then a drying mark, then a mineral edge. Later drips crossed it. Later air moved along it.
Later dust settled over parts of it. The old level remained, changed but not erased, as if the cave chose to remember softly. Rainwater continues to interact with such old features. New seepage may follow the same line because the rock there is already weakened. Mineral deposits may coat it, making it clearer in some places and hidden in others. The Nullarbor Karst maze is full of inherited paths, where each new movement is influenced by those before it. This is one reason karst mazes become intricate. Water rarely begins with a blank stone. It enters a rock already layered, fractured, weathered, and partly shaped by earlier water. Every later drop moves through a world prepared by older drops. You and I drift through that inheritance, with the darkness around us feeling deep and gentle. And as the old waterline fades behind a bend, we follow a lower route, where the air grows denser with moisture and the limestone floor shines faintly. The shine on the floor may come from a thin film of water, spread so gently that it is almost invisible.
It catches imagined light as a soft reflection, not bright, just enough to show the floor breathing with moisture. You can feel the coolness rising from it. The Nullarbor Karst maze becomes quieter here, as if every surface has been smoothed by dampness. A thin water film can be an active chemical boundary. It dissolves where undersaturated, deposits where conditions change, and carries molecules along surfaces too shallow for visible flow. Such films may form after seepage, condensation, or small recharge events. They remind us that water does not need to be deep to matter. A sheen can shape stone, given enough time.
The floor may include small rimstone features, tiny mineral dams built where water spills over a ledge and leaves calcite behind. These can create shallow terraced pools, each one holding water for a while before it overflows to the next. In the quiet of the cave, they would look like a staircase made by dripping and overflow. You can imagine water moving through them after rain. It enters the first shallow basin, rests there, spills over a white lip, and enters the next. Each overflow loses a little carbon dioxide, each lip gains a little calcite, and the terrace slowly grows. The movement is so small that it feels almost like stillness wearing a path. These features bring a delicate order to the floor, not a human order, but a mineral one, responding to gravity, chemistry, and surface tension. The Nullarbor Karst maze includes both large voids and minute edges like these. Rainwater shapes the grand chamber and the smallest rim with the same unhurried law. If tiny cave life uses these wet surfaces, it does so quietly. Microbial communities may live in films, influencing mineral precipitation in subtle ways. Small animals may drink from them or move nearby where humidity remains high. Their presence is part of the cave's hush, not a disruption. The ecosystem is woven into moisture and stone. You and I can rest our attention on one terraced pool. Its surface is black in the darkness. Its rim is pale. A drop falls into it and sends a ripple to the mineral edge. The ripple climbs the tiny wall and fades. For a moment, the pool holds the motion, then returns to perfect calm. And as the damp terraces recede into darkness, we move onward through a corridor where the ceiling lifts and the maze becomes airy again. The corridor feels unexpectedly open after the low, wet floor. Its roof rises, and the air has room to gather above us in a cool vault. You may sense a faint draft again, moving slowly from one unseen opening toward another. The Nullarbor Karst maze breathes through this higher space, exchanging air with passages we cannot see. The feeling is wide. Ventilation in caves can be controlled by multiple entrances, temperature differences, and pressure changes. In a large karst network, air may move through cracks and chambers in complex ways, especially where the surface openings are spread across the plain. This movement can dry some passages and keep others fresh. It can also carry scents, moisture, and small changes in carbon dioxide. You can imagine the draft as a slow river of air. It flows around ceiling pockets, slips along ledges, brushes mineral curtains, and disappears behind blocks. It has no sound unless it meets a narrow opening. Then it may whisper softly, a low breath in limestone. The cave seems less sealed and more connected, with the plain above resting in quiet exchange.
Air matters to rainwater's work because carbon dioxide moves between water and cave atmosphere. When water enters a cave, it may release carbon dioxide, encouraging calcite deposition. If cave air holds more carbon dioxide, dissolution may continue differently. Temperature and airflow influence evaporation. The hidden architecture depends on invisible balances, and those balances are part of the Nullarbor Karst maze. The corridor walls may show alternating zones, some dry and pale, others darker where seepage persists. In the dry zones, mineral surfaces may look powdery or matte. In damp zones, they may have a soft sheen. Your eye, if we gave it light, would move slowly from one texture to the next. Each texture says something about air and water. This interplay can feel deeply restful. Nothing here is isolated or abrupt. The draft modifies moisture. Moisture modifies minerals. Minerals modify surfaces. Surfaces guide later water. The whole cave is a set of quiet adjustments, each one folded into the next. You can let your thoughts adjust the same way, loosening, settling, and moving more slowly. At the far end of the airy corridor, a darker opening waits near the floor. It does not pull us quickly. It simply offers another descent, another continuation of the rain's path. We follow because the Nullarbor Karst maze is built from continuations, and each one leads into a deeper calm. And as we lower through that opening, the ceiling closes above us, and the sound of the upper draft becomes a memory. The lower space is more enclosed. The walls are close, but they feel rounded and worn, not sharp. There is a faint dampness in the air, and the temperature seems even more steady than before. You can imagine your breathing slowing to match the cave's quiet pressure. The Nullarbor Karst maze surrounds us like an old stone shelter. This passage may have been enlarged by water moving along a joint that intersected a bedding plane, creating a low, winding route. Such intersections are important in karst because they concentrate flow. Where two weaknesses meet, water can dissolve more effectively, and the passage can grow faster than surrounding cracks. The maze emerges from these meeting points, one connection at a time. You can see the meeting in the walls. A vertical seam may run down from the ceiling, then disappear into a horizontal ledge. The ledge may widen into a shelf, and the shelf into a side pocket. Rainwater found this geometry before we did. It moved along it with no awareness, yet the result feels almost like a carefully made corridor. In the quiet, it is easy to understand why the Nullarbor's surface has so few streams in some areas. Water prefers the hidden route. It sinks, divides,
and travels through stone rather than carving a visible channel above. The plain seems dry not because water has no story there, but because much of the story happens underneath. This hidden drainage gives the Nullarbor Karst maze its intimate quality. The landscape has an outer face of light and distance, and an inner body of shade and connection. You and I move inside that body gently, noticing how rain has linked surface to depth without spectacle. Every narrow passage is a kind of underground memory of weather. The walls here may be etched with small solution pockets, little rounded hollows where water lingered or mixed. Some are shallow as fingerprints. Others are deeper, like tiny cups in the limestone. They hold shadow, and perhaps a trace of dust or moisture. Even these small pockets show how water works by staying close to the stone. If your mind is becoming sleepy, let it stay with one pocket. It was not made quickly. Water touched it, softened it, enlarged it, and left. More water returned. The hollow grew without sound. Now it simply exists in the dark, a small place made by repeated presence. And, as the passage gently widens again, the floor drops by a shallow step, carrying us toward another chamber, layered with mineral flowstone. The flowstone appears like a pale frozen stream across the floor and down one wall. It may have formed where water flowed thinly over a surface and left calcite as it lost carbon dioxide. You can imagine it shining softly, with gentle ripples and folds, like fabric laid over rock. The Nullarbor Karst maze wears these surfaces as rainfall made visible. Flowstone is one of the clearest reminders that caves are still shaped after the first hollow opens. The water does not only excavate, it returns and dresses the stone, tracing its path in mineral layers. Each sheet may be thin, but together they can cover older textures, bind loose material, and create smooth slopes where roughness once lay. You can imagine water arriving from a crack high on the wall. It spreads as a film, glides downward, and leaves calcite in faint bands. The next wet period repeats the motion, not exactly but close enough to thicken the surface. Dry intervals pause the growth. Dust may settle, then water returns, and the pale sheet continues. The shapes in flowstone can resemble curtains, cascades, or quiet ripples, but they are all made without rushing. Even the word cascade can feel too lively for this place, so we let it mean only a slow descent preserved in mineral. The Nullarbor Karst maze gives movement a solid form and then lets it rest in silence. Trace minerals may tint the flowstone cream, amber, rust, or grey. These colors come from the water's path through soil, rock, and sediment before it reached the cave. A faint warm band may speak of iron. A pale clear layer may speak of cleaner calcite. The formation is not just decoration. It is a record of what the rain carried. You and I can follow the flowstone downward with our eyes. It leads to a lower basin where water once gathered, then spilled onward. The surface is smooth enough to suggest touch, but we leave it untouched in imagination, because cave surfaces grow slowly and hold marks easily. Respect here feels like quiet distance. There is a universal comfort in seeing motion become rest. Rain falls from moving clouds, sinks through open ground, travels through cracks, and finally lies here as stone. What was passing becomes still. What was brief becomes enduring. The Nullarbor Karst maze turns weather into memory, and memory into form. And as the flowstone slope narrows into a low lip, we follow the path of water beyond it, into a quieter passage where the floor is pale and dry. The dry floor feels almost powdery in imagination, covered with fine limestone dust and small fragments. It softens the edges of the passage and gives the air a faint chalk scent. Moisture is present only in old stains and occasional darker seams. The Nullarbor Karst maze includes these dry corridors too, where water has shaped the space and then withdrawn into absence. Absence is not failure in a cave. A dry passage can preserve forms that frequent flow might alter. It can keep footprints of animals, delicate crystals, dust layers, and old surfaces for long periods. It can also indicate that drainage has changed, leaving a former route above the active water path. The maze contains abandoned passages as naturally as it contains damp ones. You can feel the age of an abandoned passage differently. It is quiet in a drier way. Drops are rare. The air may carry more dust. The walls are pale and unshining, and the darkness seems more complete because nothing reflects within it. Yet, the shape of the corridor still says water. The Nullarbor Karst maze remembers the rain even when the rain is gone. A rounded ceiling, a smooth wall, a faint channel, or a mineral line can all tell of former flow. The dry passage is like a sentence after the voice has faded. We read it gently. We do not need it to be active right now. Its stillness is part of the descent, a place where the mind can become less busy and more open. Above this passage, the plane may have changed in ways that redirected recharge. A sink point may have clogged with sediment. A collapse may have opened another path. Climate may have shifted, altering how much water entered the system. In Karst, water routes migrate over time. Old paths are left as quiet corridors, while new ones continue the work elsewhere. You can imagine rain falling above and choosing another crack now. It bypasses this dry corridor, moving deeper or sideways through a fresher fracture. The abandoned passage remains, held in the dark, a former road through limestone. There is no sadness in that. It is simply part of the cave's slow rearrangement. The dry dust underfoot may include particles from breakdown, mineral weathering, or fine material carried in long ago. In still air, such dust can lie undisturbed for ages. It gathers on ledges, softens blocks, and mutes color. The passage becomes a place of suspension, where time feels not stopped, but almost weightless. And as the dry corridor stretches forward, a faint coolness begins to return from below, suggesting another active branch not far ahead. The coolness arrives before any sound. It touches the face first, then the hands, like air that has passed over damp stone. We follow it because it carries information from deeper in the Nullarbor Karst maze. Somewhere ahead, moisture remains. Somewhere ahead, rainwater is still touching limestone in the dark. The draft feels like a message. When active and inactive passages connect, cave air can move between them according to pressure and temperature. A dry upper route may ventilate a damp lower route, or a lower passage may feed cool air upward. These connections create subtle gradients of humidity, carbon dioxide, and temperature. The cave is a network not only of stone, but of moving atmospheres. You can imagine the dry dust giving way to firmer ground. The walls darken in patches. A narrow crack along the floor holds a shadow that looks deeper than the passage itself. The smell changes from chalky dryness to mineral dampness. Your mind follows these cues the way water follows slope, softly and without effort. Ahead, a small side opening leads downward. It may be too low for ordinary travel, but in this script, we move like attention, like water, like sleep. We can pass gently through imagined spaces without strain. The Nullarbor Karst maze lets us follow the process rather than the body, and the process is always descending. Inside the side opening, surfaces are smoother and darker. Recent moisture may have moved here after rain, leaving the limestone faintly glossy. A small strand of water could still cling to the floor, gathered in a shallow groove.
It is barely a stream, but it is enough to continue the chemistry, enough to carry dissolved stone away. The water's path may eventually join a deeper conduit, perhaps one we cannot fully see. Many karst systems include routes that become too tight, too flooded, too sediment-filled, or too complex for easy tracing. That uncertainty belongs to the peace of the maze. It reminds us that the hidden world does not need to be fully known to be real. As we follow the coolness, the passage opens just enough for a small chamber. Its floor is damp, its ceiling is low. The air holds the intimate scent of wet limestone. In this sheltered pocket, the relationship between rain and rock feels close enough to touch, and everything is near.
And as the damp pocket narrows into a fissure, we continue with the water's thought, slipping deeper into the Nullarbor's hidden architecture. The fissure is a vertical wound softened by time. Its edges are rounded where water has passed, and its base is partly filled with sediment. You can imagine looking upward and seeing only darkness tapering toward the source of seepage. Looking downward, the fissure disappears into another plane of stone. The Nullarbor Karst maze extends both ways, quiet and complex. Fissures are important because they create links between levels that might otherwise remain separate. Rainwater entering from the surface can descend along them, dissolving their sides and delivering moisture to deeper chambers. If a fissure intersects a bedding plane, water may turn sideways and begin widening a new passage. Thus, a single crack can become a junction in the underground maze. The making is slow enough to feel tender. A crack opens. Water enters. Dissolution rounds the edge. Sediment partly fills the base.
More water overtops the sediment and finds a side route. Minerals later coat some surfaces. Air begins to move through the opening. The fissure becomes not just a break, but a place of exchange. You can feel the walls close and then release as we pass through the idea of it. The stone seems to guide us by contact. No wide view is needed. In darkness, a narrow space can feel calm when everything moves slowly. Your breathing stays even, and the cave's coolness gathers around you like shade. In such places, the chemistry of rainwater may vary from one event to another. A first flush after dryness may carry more dust, salts, and organic matter from the surface. Later seepage may be clearer.
Some water may be more acidic because of soil carbon dioxide. Some may be closer to saturation after long contact with limestone. Each variation leaves a small effect. The Nullarbor Karst maze is therefore shaped by weather patterns not as individual stories, but as accumulated tendencies. Long dry periods, brief rains, wetter climatic phases, and changes in vegetation all influence what the water carries and how much of it reaches the cave. The maze remembers these tendencies in its passages, minerals and sediments. At the base of the fissure, a shallow hollow gathers the imagined water. It is not a lake, only a dark, damp place where seepage pauses before moving onward. A few white mineral grains shine against the darker clay. The sound is almost nothing. The hush here feels deep enough for sleep, and as the hollow overflows through a notch in the limestone, we follow the route into a larger chamber where the maze opens like a slow breath. The larger chamber rises around us with a calm spaciousness, its ceiling lost in dimness, and its walls curving away beyond easy sight. You can imagine the temperature steady and cool, the air faintly humid, and the floor uneven with old breakdown softened by sediment. The Nullarbor Karst maze has brought us again into openness. Large chambers can form where dissolution enlarged intersecting fractures, or where unsupported rock gradually settled after cavities widened. They may also be influenced by former water levels, sediment removal, or collapse into lower voids. The details differ from chamber to chamber, but the underlying theme remains water's patient ability to create space. Rain supplied the chemistry that began the widening. The chamber may not be actively wet now, but its shape shows water everywhere. A high wall pocket suggests past dissolution. A calcite curtain shows later dripping. A floor channel records a younger flow. Clay banks mark settling water. Each feature belongs to a different mood of rainwater, and together they form the quiet identity of the Nullarbor Karst maze. You and I pause near a fallen block at the chamber's edge. Its upper surface is dusty, but one side is coated in pale mineral, where seepage has passed over it. That contrast is soothing, because it shows how the same stone can be dry, damp, old and newly altered at once. Time is not one layer here, it is many textures. If a drop falls from the high ceiling, there is a long delay before it lands. During that delay, the room seems to listen. Then the sound arrives, small but clear, and spreads in a soft ring through the air. It fades behind the blocks, under the ledges, and into the far passages. Silence returns with greater depth. This chamber may have held different air over time. It may have been sealed for long periods or connected through openings that later changed. Its carbon dioxide levels, humidity, and mineral growth would respond to those conditions. Even the atmosphere here has a history, shaped by ventilation, water, and the living surface above. You can imagine how a cave scientist might read these signs with instruments and careful notes, but tonight we read them by feeling.
We let the science remain gentle, woven into the atmosphere. Rainwater falls, sinks, dissolves, deposits, drains, evaporates, and returns. The Nullarbor Karst maze becomes understandable as a lullaby of repeated process. And as the chamber's far wall slopes downward into another corridor, we move on before the room becomes an ending, following the rain's old route into deeper shade. The corridor beyond is marked by small scallops on the wall, shallow spoon-shaped curves left by flowing water. They are subtle, but they tell us that water once moved here with direction and enough persistence to shape the surface. You can imagine your fingertips hovering near them, feeling without touching the pattern of old current. Scallops can reveal flow direction and relative speed in cave passages. Larger scallops often relate to slower flow, smaller ones to faster flow, though local conditions can complicate the story. For us, the exact measurement is less important than the feeling of water once filling this corridor with quiet purpose. The Nullarbor Karst maze keeps that purpose in stone. The passage curves gently left, then right. Flowing water would have followed the same bends, pressing more strongly on outer walls and leaving different textures where turbulence changed. Later, when water drained away, air entered, and the passage became silent. Now the scallops remain like fossilized ripples, not of sediment, but of dissolution itself. You can picture ancient rainstorms contributing to this flow indirectly. Water sank through the plain, gathered in the subsurface, and moved through connected conduits. Perhaps many small inputs combined into one underground current. It would not need to rush in the dramatic sense. It only needed enough movement, enough chemistry, and enough time. In the corridor, the sensory world stays simple. Cool air, pale stone, a faint mineral smell, darkness that wraps around the bends. The imagined light falls softly across scalloped walls, and each curved hollow casts a shallow shadow. Your mind can travel from one to the next, slow enough that thought itself begins to smooth. There may be small deposits of sand or gravel along the lower wall, evidence that water once carried particles too heavy to remain suspended when the flow slowed. These grains might come from surface sediment, breakdown, or older cave deposits reworked by later water. The maze is always recycling its own materials, moving them gently from place to place. As the scalloped corridor continues, it dips slightly and the wall marks become less distinct. The water that shaped them may have spread into a broader zone, losing some of its focused energy. The passage becomes more softly rounded. The sound of our imagined movement grows quieter, as if the cave is asking us to become still again. And as the corridor widens into a low basin, we enter a place where water once paused long enough to settle its burden. The basin floor is smooth with fine sediment, laid down where water slowed and released what it carried. In imagination, it feels level and muted, a place where sound would be absorbed rather than returned. The walls curve gently around it. The Nullarbor Karst maze holds this basin like a cupped hand, shaped by resting water. When water slows, it loses the ability to carry larger particles first, then finer ones. Sand settles before silt, and clay may remain suspended until the water becomes almost still. Over time, repeated episodes can create layered deposits. Some layers may come from stronger flows, others from quiet ponding. The basin becomes a sediment record of changing water movement. You can imagine an underground pool occupying this basin long ago. Its surface was dark, its edges still, and its bottom slowly receiving fine particles from water entering through a low passage. Above, the dry plain continued under wind and sun. Below, the pool gathered a soft floor, one nearly invisible layer at a time. Sediment basins can also influence future cave development. They may block roots, pond water against walls, or protect floors from further dissolution. If later water cuts through them, it may create little banks and channels. The Nullarbor Karst maze is therefore shaped by both the presence and removal of sediment. By filling and emptying in long cycles, the basin's stillness has a deeply sleepy feeling. You can let your thoughts settle like silt. Larger worries fall first, then smaller fragments, then the fine cloudy particles of attention. The water clears slowly in the dark. The floor receives everything without judgment. The cave has been receiving in this way for ages.
At one edge of the basin, a mineral crust may have formed where shallow water evaporated or where calcite precipitated along a former margin. It is pale and delicate, tracing the curve of an old pool edge. A line like that can feel almost intimate because it shows where still water once touched stone for a long while. And as we leave the sediment basin by its lower side, the passage ahead narrows again, carrying us toward another hidden connection in the Nullarbor Karst maze. The connection is easy to miss. It begins as a dark crease near the floor, partly hidden by a lip of limestone and a drift of fine sediment. Water would find it before a person did, because water does not need an obvious doorway. It only needs a lower place, a slight opening, and a route that continues into darkness. We enter with the imagination of water, passing through the crease into a passage that slopes gently downward. The air is cooler here, perhaps because it connects to deeper voids. The walls are damp at the base and dry above, showing that recent water has moved low through the root. The Nullarbor Karst maze becomes more intricate with each small threshold. Karst drainage often depends on such thresholds. A small opening may control how water leaves a chamber, how sediment accumulates, and how floodwater backs up during wetter periods. Over time, that opening may enlarge, clog, reopen, or be bypassed by another route. The maze is not static. It keeps negotiating flow through many quiet constraints. You can imagine water ponding behind this threshold after heavy rain. It rises slowly in the basin, touches old wall marks, carries clay in suspension, and then begins to drain through the low crease. As it passes, it dissolves the limestone edge a little more. Later, when the basin is dry again, the crease remains slightly larger. This is how small exits grow important. They become drains, then passages, then perhaps main routes for later flow. Rainwater shapes by choosing low points, but also by enlarging the low points it chooses.
The Nullarbor Karst maze is a network of decisions made by gravity and confirmed by repetition. You can rest in that logic. The passage beyond the threshold has a different texture. It is smoother along the floor, rougher along the ceiling, suggesting more recent low flow beneath an older roof. A thin line of clay clings to one side. A tiny calcite bead catches imagined light near a crack. The details are small, but they are enough to keep us oriented. Your body listening may feel heavier now, as if it too is settling through layers. That is the gift of this kind of landscape. It teaches descent without urgency.
The plain above, the cracks, the chambers, the basins, and the lower passages all lead onward gently, through the Nullarbor's rain-carved quiet. And as this lower route bends away from the basin, the stone around us grows older in feeling, and the darkness becomes more complete. Complete darkness is difficult to imagine from the surface, where even night holds stars, horizons, and reflected light. Here, inside the Nullarbor Karst maze, darkness can be absolute when no entrance glow reaches us. Yet it is not a threatening darkness. It is a soft absence of glare, a place where the other senses come forward with care. You notice temperature first. It stays cool and even against the skin. Then sound, or the lack of it, becomes more present. A distant drip has room to fade fully. Your breath seems slower. The smell of limestone, damp clay, and mineral air becomes clearer. In darkness, the cave is not less detailed. It is detailed in another way. Rainwater has worked in darkness for most of its underground journey. It does not need light to dissolve stone. It does not need light to carry calcium, deposit calcite, or move sediment through a low channel. The great shaping of the Nullarbor Karst maze has happened unseen. That unseen labor gives the darkness a peaceful authority. There is comfort in unseen work. Not everything important announces itself. Some of the deepest changes happen quietly, below attention, repeated in small ways, until they make anew in a landscape. The Nullabor's caves are a geological version of that truth, with rainwater shaping space where no surface witness could follow. The life adapted to such darkness often releases the need for sight. Pale bodies, long sensory appendages, slow metabolisms, and careful movement can all appear in cave-adapted species. We keep the description gentle, because the point is not strangeness for its own sake. It is belonging. These lives fit the dark the way moss fits shade or coral fits water. Even microbes on cave walls may take part in subtle chemical exchanges. They can influence mineral surfaces, contribute to films, or live from small flows of energy. The cave's ecosystem is modest but finely tuned. Rainwater, by bringing moisture and nutrients from above, helps maintain the conditions that let such life persist. You and I drift through the dark without needing to see everything. The passage is known by coolness, by shape, by the memory of water in the wall. The Nullarbor Karst maze continues ahead, and our guide is the same quiet process that made it. Rain entering stone, and stone slowly making room. And as the darkness deepens, a faint mineral brightness appears ahead, where calcite has gathered along a sloping wall. The brightness is not light by itself, but a pale surface waiting to reflect whatever little light we imagine. It stretches down the wall in a broad sheet, ribbed and folded, as if a slow liquid had turned solid without losing its movement. The Nullarbor Karst maze offers another flowstone surface here, another trace of rain returning as mineral. This flowstone may have grown during periods when seepage was more regular. Water emerged from cracks near the top of the wall, spread thinly, and released calcite as it encountered cave air. Layer after layer formed, sometimes smooth, sometimes rippled. If the flow varied seasonally, the surface may hold subtle bands, each one a quiet response to changing moisture. You can imagine touching only with your eyes. The surface would be too delicate for hands, but in thought we can feel its coolness and smoothness. It looks like motion paused. It carries the memory of water sliding down stone so slowly that the slide became a mineral skin. The cave has turned downward movement into stillness. Flowstone can cover older features, hiding scallops, cracks, or sediment beneath its pale layers. It can also strengthen slopes and seal loose material. In that way, rainwater first opens the maze, then later masks parts of its earlier work. The Nullarbor Karst maze is not a simple record with every page visible. Some pages are covered by newer softness. The colors on the flowstone may shift gently, from cream to honey to pale brown. These changes reflect tiny differences in impurities, water pathways, and growth conditions. A slightly darker stripe may mean more organic material or iron. A clearer layer may mean cleaner calcite. The surface is a slow painting made by water, mineral, and time. At the base, the flowstone thins into little rounded lobes over the floor. Water may have pooled briefly between them before moving on. Each lobe marks an edge of flow, an old margin where a film of water slowed and left mineral behind. Even the edges feel gentle, like the hems of a pale underground fabric. We follow the line of the flowstone downward until it leads us toward a narrow slot at the floor. The slot is dark, cool, and low, perhaps once carrying water away from this mineral slope. The maze continues through it, and so do we, slowly, softly, without needing a destination. And as we pass through the slot, the chamber behind us becomes another layer of quiet, and the passage ahead begins to smell faintly of wet clay again. The scent of wet clay is soft and low, almost like rain after it has forgotten the sky. It rests near the floor of this passage, gathered where fine sediment has held moisture longer than the pale limestone around it. The Nullarbor Karst maze feels closer here, more intimate, as if the old water paths have narrowed around our attention. You can let your breath move slowly in the coolness. The floor has been shaped by more than dissolving. It has also been shaped by gathering, by every small particle carried down from the plain and left where water weakened. Clay softens the root and changes how later seepage behaves. A thin trickle may spread across it instead of cutting straight through. A small pool may become cloudy, then clear as the finest grains settle. You can imagine rain falling far above us after a long dry interval. It touches the flat Nullarbor surface, darkens dust, releases the warm scent of dry soil, and begins to sink. Some water moves quickly through open cracks, while some lingers in shallow pores. By the time it reaches this clay-lined passage, the storm itself may already be gone, leaving only a delayed underground arrival. That delay is important. Caves do not respond to rain all at once.
Water may take minutes, hours, days, or much longer to travel through the limestone, depending on the path it finds. Some routes are open and direct. Others are tight, twisted, and slow. The Nullarbor Karst maze turns weather into a long, softened echo below the plain. You and I follow that echo through the passage. The walls are pale above the clay, with small, darker stains where water seeped during wetter times. The ceiling is low enough to feel protective, and the air has a slight mineral dampness that settles gently in the chest. Nothing here asks us to move quickly. The cave is teaching us the pace of seepage. A small ridge of sediment along one wall marks where water once flowed just strongly enough to push grains aside.
Another patch lies smooth and undisturbed, as if it has not felt moving water for a long while. These tiny contrasts matter in Karst. They show that even within a single passage, water chooses several moods, from flow to pause to absence. And as the clay passage bends slowly left, the floor begins to firm beneath us, and the limestone rises again in pale shelves along the walls. The shelves look like natural ledges, following the bedding of the old marine limestone. They remind us that the Nullarbor Karst maze is carved inside rock that was already layered before rainwater began its quiet work. Each shelf is a remnant of difference in the stone, a place where one bed resisted a little more than another. You can almost see the ancient sea floor in those lines. Water moving through layered limestone often enlarges the softer or more fractured horizons first. A ledge may form where the lower layer dissolved back while the upper layer remained more intact. Over long time, these differences create stepped walls, low benches, and shelf-like edges that guide both water and sediment. The cave's shape is partly inherited from the sea that made the stone. You can imagine resting your attention on one shelf. Dust lies on it in a thin film. A few mineral beads cling near a crack. The surface is cool, pale, and slightly rough, though parts may be smoothed by old flow. If a drop falls onto it from above, it spreads briefly before slipping over the edge and continuing downward. The science remains simple in its heart. Limestone dissolves in weakly acidic water. The water becomes acidic by taking carbon dioxide from air and soil. The rock's layers, fractures, and fossils influence where the dissolution happens most easily. In the Nullarbor Karst maze, rainwater follows these clues for thousands upon thousands of years, until hidden pathways become large enough to hold silence. There is a calm humility in that. The cave is not made from a single grand force. It is made from small compatibility, from water meeting the right stone under the right conditions again and again. You can feel your own thoughts loosening in the same way, not forced into rest, but gradually invited there by repetition and darkness. The passage widens a little. A shelf on the right becomes a bench, and the bench curves around a shallow hollow in the wall. The hollow may once have held a swirl of water, or a pocket of air beneath a filled passage, or simply a softer patch of limestone. It is enough to notice its rounded edge and let it pass. And as these shelves fade into smoother walls, the Nullarbor Karst maze draws us toward a long corridor where the old water seems to have traveled with steadier purpose. The corridor stretches ahead in a smooth, gradual curve, with a floor that dips faintly toward the darkness. It feels like a route that water used more than once, perhaps many times, until the walls became rounded and the lower channel deepened. You can sense direction here without urgency. The passage seems to breathe us onward, quiet and steady. Where flow repeats along a route, it can organize the cave. Sediment is carried away from some places and deposited in others. Walls are polished or scalloped. Narrow points widen. Low points deepen. A passage becomes more efficient at carrying water, and later flows often return to it because it has already been opened. The Nullarbor Karst maze builds memory into its drainage. You might picture a wet phase in the long history of this limestone, when more recharge entered from above than it does during drier intervals. The corridor may have carried a larger underground stream then, not roaring, but present enough to move sediment and enlarge the walls. Later, as conditions changed, the stream weakened or shifted, leaving the corridor open and still. The air now is calm. If water remains, it is only in thin films or hidden cracks. The smell is mineral and faintly earthy. The light, in imagination, travels ahead and dissolves before reaching the far bend. The wall texture shifts from smooth to lightly pitted and back again. The Nullarbor Karst maze speaks in these textures. Some pits may come from solution where water lingered against the limestone. Others may reflect fossils, grains, or patches of different cement within the rock. Ancient marine material does not dissolve uniformly. Tiny variations become tiny hollows. Over time, the wall becomes a map of both deposition and dissolution, sea history and rain history together. You and I continue at the pace of slow water. A bend brings a cooler draft. The draft brings a trace of dampness. The dampness suggests a lower branch or a chamber where moisture gathers. Caves often reveal themselves through such small changes before they reveal themselves by shape. The body senses them first, and the mind follows gently. There is no need to count the passages. The maze is not here to be solved. It is here to be entered as a feeling of depth under a quiet plain, a feeling of rain becoming hollow space through almost unimaginable patience. The corridor carries us with that feeling, and the darkness stays soft. And as the steady corridor opens into a chamber with a lower roof, we drift into a place where the limestone ceiling feels close enough to hold the night above us. The low chamber spreads outward more than upward. Its ceiling is smooth in some places and broken by cracks in others, with pale mineral strands hanging where seepage has found a root. The floor is mostly flat, softened by fine sediment and small fallen fragments. You can imagine lying still in this chamber of thought, with the Nullarbor above us and the cool rock around you. A low chamber can form along a bedding plane where water spread laterally rather than cutting downward. If one layer dissolved more readily, the hollow may become broad and shallow, like an underground room pressed between pages of stone. The shape feels calm because it is horizontal, expansive, and enclosed without being tight. It is the plane's flatness repeated underground. Rainwater entering from above would have traveled through fractures until it reached this favorable layer. Then it would have spread sideways, dissolving along the seam and widening the chamber's edges. Later, mineral deposits may have softened the ceiling, while sediment gathered on the floor. The Nullarbor Karst maze is full of such patient transformations of ancient bedding into passage. The sound in a low chamber is especially gentle. A drip does not fall far. It lands quickly, softly, perhaps on clay rather than stone. Your breath seems to stay near you. The air has a cool steadiness that belongs to underground spaces, where daily heat and wind have been filtered away. The chamber feels like a sheltered pause. Along one wall, a darker stain may show where water seeps after rain. The stain follows a crack downward, then spreads near the floor. During dry times it may fade, but its path remains visible as a subtle difference in color and texture. This is one of the ways the cave remembers recent water, alongside ancient shaping. At the chamber's far side, small stalagmites rise from a line of drip points. They are not tall, just rounded mineral mounds receiving drops from above. Each one marks a place where water has returned often enough to build a form. They seem almost like quiet candles of stone, unlit but pale, keeping time in the dark. You can let your attention settle on their slowness. A form that grows drop by drop does not need to prove anything. It simply receives what comes, rests between arrivals, and holds each trace. The Nullarbor Karst maze is made of that kind of receiving as much as carving, and the thought itself is restful. And as we leave the low chamber through a shallow opening at its edge, the ceiling rises again, and a faint sense of depth opens beneath the floor. The opening leads toward a shaft-like space, not abrupt, but gradually deepening where water once followed a vertical weakness. The walls tilt away, and the floor descends in steps of limestone and sediment. You can feel the air cool slightly as it comes up from below, carrying a damp mineral scent. The Nullarbor Karst maze turns downward once more with patience. Vertical development in karst often begins where fractures allow recharge to descend. Water flowing downward dissolves the sides of the fracture, widens it, and may create a shaft or inclined passage. If falling water carries sediment, it can abrade as well as dissolve, though the main work in limestone remains chemical. Over time, a small opening can become a deeper route between levels. You can imagine water entering from a surface depression above. At first it seeps through soil and cracked limestone. Then, during wetter periods, more of it gathers into the vertical route. It slides, drips, and sometimes falls from ledge to ledge, enlarging each contact point. The shaft grows downward not by one event, but by repeated descents of rain. The walls around us may show vertical fluting, where water has run down in narrow lines. Some grooves are shallow, others are smoothed into rounded channels. Mineral deposits may coat their lower ends, where water slowed or changed chemistry. Each groove is a downward sentence written by gravity through stone. At the base of a small ledge, a pile of pebbles and clay gathers where falling water once lost energy. During later flows, some of that material may have been carried onward, while heavier grains remained. Such deposits can partly block the route, causing water to spread across new surfaces and enlarge them too. The cave develops through both open paths and obstructions. You and I descend not as climbers, but as listeners following the shape of water. The shaft is quiet now. There is only the imagined coolness rising from below, the faint smell of damp limestone, and the sense that the plain above has become very far away. Yet the rain that made this descent began at the surface, under open sky. This contrast deepens the sleep-like feeling. Above, the world is broad and exposed. Below, the route is enclosed and vertical, carrying us through shadow. The same rain connects both places, falling through brightness and then moving through darkness. Your body can feel that as a slow release, a leaving of surface noise for buried calm. And as the shaft eases into a sloping passage at its base, the downward movement becomes horizontal again, and the maze resumes its gentle winding. The sloping passage levels gradually, with a floor worn smoother along its lowest line. A small amount of water may still use this route after enough rain, though now it rests mostly dry and quiet. The walls are marked by old flow, and the ceiling holds small pockets where air may once have been trapped. The Nullarbor karst maze continues in layers. A passage like this may represent a transition between vertical recharge and horizontal drainage. Water descends through fractures, reaches a more permeable or favorable bed, and then moves sideways toward lower parts of the system. This pattern repeats across karst landscapes. It creates networks that are three-dimensional, yet guided by the structure of the rock. You can imagine many such transitions scattered beneath the Nullarbor Plain. Each begins at a crack, hollow, or sink point above. Each turns where the limestone allows. Some routes connect into large chambers, while others fade into narrow seams. The full maze is greater than any one passage, but each passage contains the whole story in miniature. The air in this level passage is slightly more humid than in the dry corridor above. The floor holds dark patches, and the walls have a cooler feel. A faint dripping comes from somewhere ahead, irregular enough to seem natural and far apart. It is the sound of time moving at cave speed, slow and unconcerned. As we follow the passage, a small side pocket opens on the left. It is rounded and smooth, perhaps formed by swirling water or by focused dissolution around a softer patch of stone. Fine sediment lies inside it, undisturbed. Such pockets can become little shelters for moisture, dust, and small life. They are minor features, but they make the cave feel inhabited by detail. Rainwater does not make only grand chambers. It also makes dimples, grooves, beads, rims, shelves, notches, and small shaded hollows. These details create the atmosphere of the Nullarbor karst maze as much as its larger architecture does. The eye would wander among them slowly. The mind can do the same, becoming calmer with each small noticing. Ahead, the passage floor shows a faint central channel. It is shallow, but continuous for several body lengths in imagination. Water chose this line whenever it had enough volume to move. Later, when flow ended, the channel remained as a narrow invitation deeper into the cave, and as we follow that central channel, the passage begins to widen toward a place where old pools once gathered in darkness. The widening is gradual, and the floor flattens as if prepared to hold water. Along the wall, pale mineral rims trace former edges of shallow pools. The center is darker with fine sediment, smooth and slightly lower than the rest. You can imagine the surface of an old pool there, still as black glass, reflecting a ceiling no sunlight had ever reached.
The Nullarbor Karst maze keeps the memory. Pools in caves can be temporary or persistent, depending on recharge, drainage, evaporation, and the shape of the floor. In a dry region, temporary pools may appear after rain and then slowly recede, leaving sediment, mineral films, or crystalline edges. Even brief pools can matter when they return repeatedly over long time. They shape surfaces through quiet contact. You can picture rainwater arriving through the central channel and spreading into the basin, the first water clouds with fine clay. Then, as movement slows, the cloud settles and the pool clears. The water becomes a dark mirror, holding dissolved limestone, traces of surface dust, and perhaps a faint coolness from the deeper cave. It rests until drainage or evaporation lowers it.
At the margins, calcite may precipitate as water loses carbon dioxide or becomes more concentrated. Over many episodes, low rims and crusts form. They can mark old water levels, small terraces, or pool boundaries. These delicate edges are like the cave's handwriting, fine and pale, recording where still water paused against stone. Small life may use such pools when they are present. Microorganisms can form films. Tiny invertebrates may move through wet sediment or cling to submerged surfaces. Their world expands when water arrives and contracts as it recedes. In the Nullarbor Karst maze, life may follow moisture with the same attentiveness that water follows gravity. The pool is gone in our present imagining, but the space remains calm. The dry basin seems to remember the reflective surface. The walls curve inward, the mineral rims catch faint light, and the sediment floor lies smooth. Your thoughts can settle there like particles in dark water, descending until they rest without disturbance.
There is beauty in a pool that appears only sometimes. It does not need permanence to shape the cave. It returns, rests, leaves a trace, and disappears. So much of the Nullarbor Karst maze has been made by temporary things that became lasting through repetition, and that thought has a very gentle weight. And as the old pool basin narrows at its far end, a low passage carries us onward, beneath a ceiling freckled with small mineral points. The mineral points shine faintly in imagination, like pale stars caught in the ceiling rather than the sky. They may be tiny beginnings of stalactites, small calcite beads, or deposits around seepage points where water has entered. Each one marks a place where rainwater paused long enough to leave a trace.
The Nullarbor Karst maze turns the ceiling into a quiet map. Seepage points often correspond to cracks, pores, or joints in the limestone above. Water traveling through the rock emerges where the path meets open air. If the water is supersaturated with calcite, it deposits mineral as it drips. If it remains capable of dissolving, it may enlarge the opening instead. The same point can change behavior as chemistry and airflow change. You can imagine a drop forming at one bead. It appears slowly, almost imperceptibly, fed by water moving through stone overhead. It swells, reflects the faint shape of the passage, and then lets go. The drop falls only a short distance, landing on the floor with a muted sound. Above it, another drop begins, but not yet. The spacing of these points may tell us about the fracture network overhead. A line of beads may follow a crack. A cluster may mark a small area of more porous limestone. A solitary point may be fed by a narrow root no wider than a hair. The visible cave is only the open part. Around it, the rock itself contains countless tiny pathways. This surrounding rock is not dead solid. It is full of microscopic and small-scale openings, some connected, some isolated, some widened by dissolution, some sealed by mineral growth. Rainwater travels through this hidden fabric before becoming a cave drip. The Nullarbor Karst maze includes both the passages we imagine and the unseen porosity around them. The air beneath the mineral points is quiet enough for waiting. In a sleep video, waiting is part of the gift. We wait with the next drop, not counting, not needing it to fall. The cave continues whether we notice or not. The slow formation of a bead is enough movement for this depth. As we pass under the ceiling, the passage floor becomes slightly rougher. Small calcite patches mark where drops have struck repeatedly. Some are low mounds, some are only pale stains. The ceiling and floor are in conversation, one drop at a time, across the cool air between them. And as that dripping corridor fades behind us, we enter a stretch where the walls are dry, pale, and marked by the delicate lace of solution. The dry walls are not blank. They hold small irregular hollows, thin ridges, and etched textures that make the limestone look almost like softened bone or weathered chalk. You can imagine moving beside them slowly, letting the patterns pass at the edge of attention. The Nullarbor Karst maze here feels ancient, spare, and quietly detailed. Solutional lace can form where water moves unevenly across limestone surfaces, dissolving along tiny variations in texture, composition, or exposure. Some areas are protected by mineral coatings or sediment, while others are more open to contact. Over time, the wall develops a delicate relief. It is not ornament placed on stone.
It is the stone's own response to water. The dryness now suggests this passage has not been recently active, at least not in an obvious way, yet the textures remain from earlier moisture. A cave can preserve the feeling of water long after water has shifted elsewhere. The Nullarbor Karst maze is full of such preserved gestures because underground spaces are sheltered from wind, sun, and daily weather. You can feel the absence of surface change here. No bright heat, no blowing dust, no open sky, only cool air, pale walls, and the quiet memory of chemical work. The lack of hurry becomes almost physical, like a hand laid gently over the mind. Your thoughts may move more slowly because the passage itself has no urgency. A faint draft crosses the dry wall and vanishes through a crack ahead. It carries a trace of another chamber, perhaps damper, perhaps larger. Caves often communicate through openings too small to enter in ordinary ways, but air and water still pass. These subtle connections keep the Nullarbor Karst maze from being a set of separate rooms. It is a linked breathing system. We drift with the draft. The etched wall gives way to smoother limestone, and a low rib of rock divides the floor. On one side, dust has gathered. On the other, a darker stain suggests occasional seepage. Even where the passage is dry overall, microclimates exist within a few steps, shaped by air, slope, and surface texture. That is another quiet truth of Karst. It is not uniform. It is a mosaic of slightly different conditions, and each difference matters over time. A damp corner dissolves. A dry ledge preserves dust. A ventilated crack grows crystals. A still hollow shelters moisture. The Nullarbor Karst maze is made from these small environmental gradients.
And as the etched passage lowers toward the draft's source, a wider darkness opens ahead, and the air becomes cooler again. The wider darkness feels like a chamber before we fully enter it. The air has depth. A drip sound arrives from farther away, with a longer echo than the narrow passage allowed. The floor slopes gently downward, and the smell of damp clay returns beneath the mineral scent. The Nullarbor Karst maze opens around us with a slow, spacious breath. This chamber may have formed where several roots converged, allowing more water to pass and dissolve the limestone more effectively. Convergence is powerful in Karst, though still patient. Separate seepage paths combine into a stronger flow, and the shared route enlarges. Later, when flow changes or drains away, the enlarged space remains as a hollow under the plane. The ceiling here may be uneven, with high pockets and lower ribs. Some pockets could be remnants of dissolution under water-filled conditions. Others could result from later breakdown or focused dripping. The floor holds fallen stones, clay banks, and smooth patches where water has moved between them. A chamber is not one process. It is many processes meeting. You can imagine the chamber during a wetter time. Water enters from two side passages, spreads across the floor, and drains through a lower exit. Clay settles in quieter corners. Calcite grows where dripping continues after the main flow has gone. Air later returns and dries some walls, while dampness remains near the exit. The cave adjusts without drama. A large chamber can feel like a night sky turned inward. The ceiling disappears into dark height, and pale formations appear only where imagined light touches them. Shadows lie behind blocks. The air is cool against the skin. The silence feels wide enough to hold every small sound. You and I stand within that silence gently, held by stone. The life in such a chamber may gather near moisture, entrances, organic deposits, or stable damp sediments. It is not evenly spread. In caves, life follows resources, and resources often follow water. Rain is therefore not only a sculptor of rock, but a carrier of possibility. It brings the faint nourishment that lets hidden ecosystems continue. You can picture tiny movements near a damp clay bank, almost too small to name. A pale shape pauses. A thread-like antenna feels the air. Microbial films darken a wet patch of stone. Everything is quiet, economical, and suited to the deep rhythm of the cave. Nothing wastes light, because there is no light to waste, and as the chamber floor tilts toward its lower exit, we continue with the gentle pull of gravity, leaving the wide darkness behind without closing it. The lower exit is framed by smooth limestone, worn by water that has left the chamber many times. Its edges are rounded, and the floor shows a shallow groove where drainage focused. You can imagine water slipping through after a rain event, carrying suspended clay and dissolved minerals into the next passage. The Nullarbor Karst maze guides it onward, in silence. Drainage exits often shape the behavior of chambers. If an exit is small, water may pond behind it. If it enlarges, the chamber drains more quickly. If sediment blocks it, water may find another route, changing the direction of future dissolution. In Karst, every opening is both an effect and a cause, shaped by water and then shaping water in return. You and I move through the exit as if following the last thin flow after a pool has lowered. The walls are damp near the base. The upper surfaces are dry. A line of tiny mineral deposits marks a former seepage path. The passage bends gently, and the chamber's echo fades until only close silence remains. The floor channel deepens slightly here. It may have carried water more often than the chamber floor, because all drainage was focused through this narrow place. Concentrated flow can increase dissolution along the route, widening the exit over long periods. It can also remove sediment, keeping the passage open. The cave's own plumbing slowly improves itself through repeated use. There is a calm inevitability in this. Water gathers where the shape allows, then reshapes the allowance. It finds the lower edge, then makes the edge lower. It enters the small opening, then makes the opening larger. The Nullarbor Karst maze is a record of feedback so slow that it feels like fate, though it is only physics and chemistry. The passage walls ahead carry faint horizontal bands. These may reflect bedding, old water levels, mineral staining, or differences in limestone texture. They give the sense of moving through layered time. Each band passes beside us quietly, like a line in a very old song. Your breathing remains slow enough to follow without counting. At one bend, a cluster of small stones lies against the outer wall, deposited where water lost energy as it turned. The stones are pale and rounded, not by a river above ground, but by movement within the cave. They rest now, waiting for the next rare flow that might shift them a little farther, and as the bend straightens, the passage lowers into a zone where the air is cooler still, and the stone underfoot feels closer to hidden groundwater. The coolness is steady and deeper than the cooling of a simple draft. It suggests a lower level of the system, where moisture persists and temperatures are held by the surrounding rock. The Nullarbor Karst maze feels less like a dry network now, and more like the edge of a buried water world. You can sense that change in the air. Groundwater in Karst moves through a combination of tiny pores, fractures, and larger conduits. Some water travels slowly through the rock matrix, Some moves more rapidly through open passages. The relationship between these routes is complex, but the feeling underground is simple. Water is present even when it is unseen. It cools the air and darkens the stone. You can imagine the limestone around us saturated in places beyond the visible passage. Water fills small openings and larger voids, responding to recharge from rain and to broader hydraulic gradients. Where the passage intersects this wetter zone, dampness appears on walls or floors. Where it remains slightly above, the cave stays air-filled but humid. The boundary can shift over time. The floor ahead holds shallow puddles. They are not large, but their surfaces reflect the ceiling in fragments. Each puddle occupies a low point dissolved or worn by earlier water. Fine sediment lies beneath the surface, undisturbed. A drop landing in one puddle sends rings outward until they meet the limestone edge and return as tiny overlapping ripples. Standing in imagination beside these puddles, you can feel the sleepiness of reflected darkness. The water doubles the cave and softens it. Edges become wavering. The ceiling becomes a shadow below. Sound becomes rounder. The Nullarbor Karst maze seems to fold inward on itself, water holding stone and stone holding water. These small pools may gain and lose water with seasons, recharge, and evaporation. Their chemistry may change as water rests, exchanges gases with cave air, and interacts with minerals on the floor. If they become supersaturated, they may deposit calcite along their edges or over submerged objects. If they remain undersaturated, they may continue dissolving limestone gently. In a quiet pool, a thin mineral film can sometimes form on the surface, delicate enough to break with a drop. It may look like a faint skin, almost invisible. Such films can later sink or attach to edges, adding to the pool's mineral record. The details are small, but in a cave, small details are the language. And as we move beyond the puddled floor, the passage divides into two low branches, and we follow the one where the air feels most gently damp. The damp branch slopes downward by degrees, and the ceiling lowers enough to make the space feel sheltered. The walls are smooth near the base, where water has moved more recently, while the upper surfaces remain pale and dry. The Nullarbor Karst maze gives us another example of stacked histories within one passage. You can breathe slowly into the cool. A divided passage can form when water finds multiple routes around resistant rock, sediment plugs, or structural barriers. One branch may become active while another is abandoned. Later conditions may reverse the pattern. The maze-like quality comes from such branching, rejoining, bypassing, and redirection. Rainwater explores the limestone through countless small alternatives. You can imagine water reaching the fork after heavy rain. Some of it enters the drier branch, wetting dust and reactivating old surfaces. More of it follows the damp branch, because the slope and opening favor that route. As it moves, it enlarges this path a little more, reinforcing the choice for future flows. The branch slowly becomes the preferred way. Inside the damp branch, a thin line of calcite marks the edge of frequent wetting. Above it, the wall is matte. Below it, the wall has a faint sheen. This difference may be subtle, but it shows the height to which water usually rises or splashes. The cave writes ordinary repetition into visible form. Your attention can rest on that line. It is not dramatic. It is just a boundary between slightly different conditions, made meaningful by time. Many things in the Nullarbor Karst maze are like this. Quiet edges, small marks, slow thresholds. The landscape becomes profound because it does not hurry to be seen. The branch turns gently, and a small alcove appears where the wall has dissolved back around a softer patch. Moisture collects there, and the clay at its base is darker. A cave-adapted organism might find refuge in such a place, where humidity remains stable and food traces gather. It would move slowly, guided by touch and chemistry. Life in these small refuges reminds us that the Karst maze is not only geology, it is habitat, though austere and hidden. Rainwater carries the connection to the surface, and the limestone provides the shelter. Together they make a world where life can persist without brightness, without abundance, and without haste, And as the damp branch widens slightly, the floor becomes smooth again, and the sound of a distant drip returns from ahead. The distant drip is regular for a while, then irregular, as if water is reaching the ceiling through a complicated path above. Each drop falls somewhere beyond the next bend and lands with a soft rounded note. You can feel the sound moving through the passage before it fades. In the Nullarbor Karst maze, a single drip can make the darkness feel deep. The source may be a seepage route connected to the surface through many cracks and small storage pockets. After rain, water held in the epikarst drains slowly downward, producing delayed dripping in deeper caves. The timing of drips can therefore reflect not only the present moment, but rainfall that has already passed from the surface world. The cave keeps weather after the sky clears. You can imagine the drop's full journey. It began as rain beneath a wide southern sky. It sank through dusty soil, past roots, entered fractured limestone, dissolved a little calcite, paused in a tiny void, moved again, and finally reached the cave ceiling. It is both ordinary and extraordinary, because everything in the maze depends on such journeys repeated without end. At the bend, the passage opens into a small drip chamber. The ceiling is lower here, and several mineral straws hang in a loose cluster. Beneath them, the floor rises in rounded stalagmites no higher than quiet thoughts. Each formation marks a persistent route through the stone above. Water has been arriving here often enough to build a small mineral garden. The word garden can be gentle here, not green, but pale and slow. The formations grow without leaves, fed by rainwater rather than sunlight. They are rooted in chemistry. Their blossoms are drops. Their season is measured in recharge and pause, wet and dry, seep and stillness. The Nullarbor Karst maze keeps this underground garden in darkness. You can let your mind move from one stalagmite to another. One is smooth and rounded. One has a slightly flattened top from frequent dripping. One is stained amber along one side, perhaps from trace minerals or organic compounds carried from above. Their differences are small, and that smallness helps the mind soften. The drip chamber also records changes in rainfall over time. Faster growth may occur during wetter conditions, while dry intervals may leave pauses or subtle surfaces within the mineral layers. Scientists can study such deposits to understand past climates, but tonight we only need the feeling, rain written into stone so slowly that the writing becomes a lullaby. And as the dripping continues behind us, we leave the small mineral garden and move into a lower corridor where the walls draw inward again. The lower corridor is narrow but smooth, with a floor that feels gently worn. The air is humid enough to soften the mineral scent, and the walls hold a faint shine near their base. You can imagine the passage as a quiet throat of limestone, carrying occasional water from one chamber to the next. The Nullarbor Karst maze continues its inward thread. Narrow conduits can be important even when they are not visually grand. They connect storage spaces, drain basins, and distribute water through the system. A small conduit can control how quickly a chamber empties, how sediment moves, and where later dissolution focuses. In Karst, the smallest open routes often shape the behavior of larger spaces. You can picture water entering this corridor as a shallow flow. It touches both walls, threads around tiny projections, and carries fine clay toward a lower chamber. Where the corridor narrows, flow speeds slightly and may dissolve more strongly along the sides. Where it widens, sediment may settle. The passage is a long negotiation between movement and rest. The ceiling above shows a line of darker moisture. It may be a fracture still feeding seepage into the corridor. Water emerging from it runs down one wall in a thin, invisible film, keeping that side darker than the other. Over time, the asymmetry matters. One wall may dissolve or mineralize differently, and the passage becomes subtly uneven. Your body can rest into the lack of symmetry. Natural places are rarely perfect, and that is part of their calm. The Nullarbor Karst maze is shaped by countless slight imbalances. More water here, less there, a crack opening this way, a layer resisting that way. The result is intricate without being restless, complex without being loud. As we move through the corridor, the sound of dripping fades. In its place comes the deeper hush of enclosed air. The corridor bends, and the bend hides what lies ahead. That concealment feels gentle rather than suspenseful. In a sleep journey, not knowing the next chamber is simply another way to let the mind release its need to plan. A small patch of white crystals appears near the floor, perhaps formed where mineral-rich water evaporated in a sheltered niche. The crystals are delicate and pale, growing from chemistry that continued after visible water had gone. Even dryness can leave beauty when water has visited first. And as the corridor bends one last time, the walls open suddenly but softly into a broad, low space where sediment lies in long, quiet bands. The bands run across the floor in muted colors: pale beige, reddish-brown, gray, and cream, each one laid down by water under slightly different conditions. You can imagine them stretching across the chamber like calm tides preserved underground. The Nullarbor karst maze becomes an archive again, holding the surface's dust and rain in layers. Sediment layering can form when water enters repeatedly with changing energy or material. A stronger flow may bring coarser sand. A quieter pool may leave silt and clay. A dust-rich event may contribute reddish particles from the plain. Over time, these layers stack, and the cave floor becomes a record of many arrivals. The bands are not decorative, though they look beautiful in thought. You and I move beside them without disturbing them. Their surface may be firm in places and powdery in others. Small cracks may form when wet clay dries and shrinks. Later, water can fill those cracks with lighter sediment, making fine patterns. The cave floor keeps evidence of wetting, drying, settling, and return. These bands remind us that the Nullarbor karst maze was not shaped only by water dissolving upward and outward. It was also shaped by material coming in from above, by the landscape slowly sending pieces of itself down into its own hidden spaces. Rainwater is the carrier, gravity is the guide, stillness is the keeper. A chamber with sediment bands may feel softer than bare limestone chambers. Sound is muted. The air seems close to the floor. The smell is earthy, damp in low areas and dusty along dry ridges. You can feel the surface plane here more strongly, as if the desert-like openness above has been folded into the underground dark grain by grain. In those sediments, traces of past environments may rest, though we let them remain unnamed and undisturbed. Pollen, charcoal, mineral grains, and organic fragments can all enter caves and survive in sheltered layers. The Nullarbor karst maze can therefore preserve hints of changing surface conditions. Carried inward by weather and time, your thoughts can settle with the bands. Each layer arrived, spread, quieted, and was covered by the next. None had to be final. None had to announce itself. They became a floor by accepting what came after. This is a gentle idea for sleep, a way of feeling time not as pressure, but as settling. And as the sediment-banded chamber slopes toward a lower side passage, the layers thin out, and bare limestone returns beneath a film of moisture. The film of moisture is almost invisible, but it changes everything. It darkens the limestone slightly and gives it a quiet sheen. It cools the air near the floor and gathers in shallow hollows where the passage dips. The Nullarbor karst maze feels active again in this low side passage, though the activity is as soft as breath. Water films can move slowly under gravity, capillary forces, and tiny surface irregularities. They may dissolve limestone where the water remains undersaturated, or deposit minerals where carbon dioxide escapes and saturation changes. Their movement is so slight that it can feel like stillness, yet over enough time, even a film can shape the stone. You can imagine this film being renewed after rainfall above. At first the passage darkens along the cracks, then moisture spreads thinly over the floor. It gathers dust into faint trails, fills small depressions, and begins its quiet chemical exchange with limestone. Later, it may evaporate, leaving mineral traces, clay edges, or pale crusts behind. The passage walls are close but not oppressive. They curve gently, smoothed by older water, and their surfaces alternate between dry pale patches and darker damp streaks. A thin seam along the ceiling feeds occasional drops. The smell is mineral, cool and slightly earthy. Your listening body can drift lower with the passage, heavy and calm. In this zone, dissolution and deposition may happen near each other. A seep can dissolve stone as it emerges, then deposit calcite a little farther along as conditions change. This closeness gives Karst its layered complexity. The Nullarbor Karst maze is made not from one process in one direction, but from paired processes moving through the same water. A shallow basin appears along the floor, filled with clear water only a finger deep in imagination. Its bottom is pale limestone, visible through the still surface. Around its edge, a thin white rim has begun to form. The rim is small, but it tells us water has paused here repeatedly. It is another quiet boundary made by return. You can rest your attention on the basin's surface. It reflects no sky, only stone. A drop lands and breaks the reflection, then the surface repairs itself without effort. In that repair, there is a soothing rhythm, a reminder that stillness is not broken forever by small disturbances. It gathers itself again, and as the shallow basin overflows through a notch, we follow the slight descent into a passage where old dissolution pockets pockmark the walls. The pockets are rounded and irregular, clustered at different heights along the limestone. Some are no larger than a thumbprint, while others would hold a shadow deep enough to seem like a small cave within the cave. The Nullarbor Karst maze is full of these minor hollows, each one a soft record of water touching stone. Dissolution pockets can form where water lingers, where currents swirl, where mixing changes chemistry, or where the limestone contains material that dissolves more readily. Their shapes vary because the conditions around them vary. They are small examples of the same process that made larger rooms. A chamber is a pocket enlarged by enough time and connection. You can imagine water filling this passage in an earlier stage. It pressed into small irregularities, lingered in some, moved past others, and slowly deepened the ones where dissolution was favored. Later the water level dropped, leaving the pockets dry and visible. Now they hold dust, shadow, and occasionally a bead of moisture after rain. The sensory world here is textured. The wall would feel uneven under a careful hovering hand, cool in the hollows and smoother on the ridges between. The air carries the faint scent of wet limestone. The passage narrows and widens in small increments. Nothing is symmetrical, yet everything feels related, shaped by the same gentle principle. In the lower pockets, tiny sediments may collect. Clay, silt, and mineral grains settle there when water drains away. A small animal might shelter in one damp hollow if conditions allow. A microbial film might grow where moisture lasts. The pockets become small habitats, small reservoirs, small memory cups in the wall. This is part of the beauty of the Nullarbor Karst maze. It contains large-scale wonder, but it also rewards small-scale quiet. The listener does not need a sweeping view to remain held by the place. A single wall pocket can carry the whole story of rainwater, limestone, time, and darkness. As we pass the pocketed wall, the passage begins to tilt upward for a short distance. The floor is dry on the rise, and moisture gathers only below. This little rise may have redirected water, slowing it on one side and guiding it along another route during lower flows. And as we crest the gentle rise, a cooler breath meets us from beyond, and the path descends again into the next branch of the Nullarbor Karst maze. The cooler breath comes from a dark opening near the floor, wide enough for water, air, and imagination to pass. It carries a dampness that suggests deeper connection. We follow it softly, letting the dry rise fall behind us and the lower passage draw near. The Nullarbor Karst maze continues to fold inward, one quiet branch after another. The descent is slight, but its effect is noticeable. The floor darkens. The air steadies. A faint line of clay appears along the wall, marking where water once stood or moved. The passage seems younger in its surfaces, though the rock itself is ancient. In caves, youth and age lie together, because new water works inside old limestone. Rainwater may have found this branch after another route became blocked or less favorable. Karst systems often evolve by capture, where one passage begins to drain water that once used another. The capturing route enlarges, while the abandoned one becomes drier. Over time, the pattern of the maze shifts. The hidden drainage reorganizes itself without noise. You can picture that reorganization as a quiet turning of attention. Water once moved elsewhere. Sediment gathered. A lower crack opened. Flow began to favor the new branch. The new branch widened just enough to accept more flow. The process reinforced itself, and the Nullarbor Karst maze became a little more intricate. The walls here are smoother near the base because recent water has moved along them. Above, older pockets and dry stains remain from previous conditions. This vertical layering of textures shows how water levels change through the passage over time. A cave wall is not just a boundary. It is a record of heights. You and I drift lower with the branch. The sound becomes more enclosed, as if wrapped in damp stone. The smell of clay is faint, but steady. Somewhere ahead, water may be resting in a hidden pool or moving through a constricted slot. We do not need to reach it quickly. The slow approach is the purpose. There is comfort in following a process that does not depend on us. Rain fell before us. Limestone yielded before us. The maze opened in darkness, long before anyone named it. We are only listening now, and the listening can be light, unforced and restful. And as the branch curves around a buttress of limestone, the passage opens into a tall, narrow chamber where water once descended from above. The chamber rises like a vertical room, slender and cool, with walls marked by downward grooves. The ceiling disappears into darkness, and the floor is scattered with small stones washed or fallen from above. You can imagine standing at the base and feeling the height as a quiet column of air. The Nullarbor Karst maze breathes upward here through shadow. Such chambers can form where vertical fractures or shafts intersect larger passages. Water descending from the surface or upper levels may enlarge the shaft, then enter the lower chamber with enough persistence to shape the walls. The grooves show the path of water falling, sliding, and spreading. Gravity writes downward and limestone remembers. During rain, this place may become briefly more active. Water seeps through the upper fracture, gathers along ledges, and falls in separate threads. It darkens the walls and carries fine sediment to the floor. Some of it drains onward through lower cracks. Some evaporates later, leaving mineral traces. The chamber returns to stillness after the rain has passed. You can hear the imagined water without making it loud. It is a soft ticking of drops, a thin trickle along one wall, a muted landing on clay. No rush, no force, just the sound of wetness visiting stone. The air smells clean and mineral, with a faint coolness rising from the damp floor. The grooves on the wall may be polished, where water has followed the same route many times. Between them, drier ridges may hold pale crusts or dust. This alternating surface tells of focused flow and sheltered stillness side by side. The Nullarbor Karst maze is always arranging contrasts gently, never as conflict, only as variation. At the base, a small fan of sediment spreads from the wall where falling water loses energy. Coarser grains lie nearer the source, finer clay farther out. Repeated wetting may have shaped it into a low cone. Later drips may cut tiny channels through it. Even a small fan can show the logic of movement and rest. You can let the tall chamber pass around you slowly. The upward darkness does not need to be explored tonight. It is enough to know it connects to rain's entrance, somewhere above, through limestone and time. We continue along the lower outlet, following the water after it has descended and gathered itself. And as the tall chamber narrows behind us, the outlet carries us into a quiet tunnel where the limestone walls are rounded like the inside of an old shell. The shell-like feeling is fitting because the limestone itself began with marine remains. The walls are pale, smooth, and faintly curved, enclosing the passage with a calm that seems almost oceanic. You can imagine the old sea transformed into stone around us, then shaped by rain from a later sky. The Nullarbor Karst maze holds sea and rain in one body. Marine limestone often contains fossils, shell fragments, and carbonate grains from warm, shallow waters. After burial, compaction, cementation, uplift, and exposure turned those sediments into a landscape ready for karst. Rainwater then began dissolving the rock wherever chemistry and structure allowed. The cave is therefore a conversation between ancient ocean deposition and later surface weather. You can picture a shell fragment in the wall, mostly fused into the limestone, its original shape softened by time. Water moving past it may dissolve the surrounding material at a different rate. A tiny edge, pocket, or texture may remain. The entire passage is made of such histories, too numerous to name, all gathered into pale stone. The tunnel curves gently. Its smoothness suggests a period of water-filled dissolution, when flow pressed evenly around the passage. Later, a small floor channel was cut after air entered. The older rounded form and younger incised line coexist. This is how the Nullarbor Karst maze layers events without erasing their quiet differences. There is a sleep-deepening calm in thinking of old seabed under dry plain and rainwater under both. The world changes form but keeps continuity. Sea becomes limestone, limestone becomes cave, rain becomes passage, passage becomes still air. Your thoughts can follow those changes until they, too, become softer. The tunnel's acoustics are close and rounded. A whisper would stay near the walls. A drip would travel ahead as a gentle pulse. The air feels cool enough to slow the body, but not cold. The scent is clean, with the faint chalk note that belongs to dissolved and redeposited limestone. Everything remains unhurried. Along the floor channel, tiny pebbles rest in shallow pockets. They may have been moved during occasional flows and stranded when water weakened. Their presence shows that even in a cave mostly shaped by dissolution, physical transport also matters. Rainwater carries, sorts, leaves, and sometimes returns to move the same grains again. And as the shell-like tunnel straightens, a pale curtain of calcite appears along one wall, hanging where water has seeped from a crack above. The calcite curtain is thin at its edge, folded in soft vertical lines, and faintly translucent in the imagination. It hangs from the wall rather than the ceiling, formed by water flowing over an inclined surface and leaving mineral behind. The Nullarbor Karst maze has many ways of letting rain become visible, and this curtain is one of the most delicate. Curtains form when water seeps along a sloping crack or wall, depositing calcite along its path. Slight variations in flow create folds and ribs. Trace minerals may add bands of amber, brown, or cream. Over time, the sheet lengthens and thickens, though its edge may remain fragile. It is the shape of water sliding with gravity and pausing as stone. You can imagine the curtain during active seepage. A thin film glides down its surface, too shallow to make much sound. At the lower edge, droplets gather and fall, one by one, to the floor. Each drop adds to a small ridge below. The formation grows from continuity, from the same path being chosen again and again. The curtain also tells us that water above is finding a specific route through the limestone. Perhaps a crack collects seepage after rain and directs it along this wall. Perhaps sediment or mineral deposits have altered the flow, spreading it into a sheet. The visible beauty is the outcome of hidden plumbing, quiet and precise. You and I do not touch it. We only let the image pass slowly, the pale folds hanging in darkness, the wall behind it cool and slightly damp. The cave's softness is partly visual, but also ethical. Slow places ask for gentle attention. Formations that take ages to grow can be honored simply by being left alone. Below the curtain, the floor may hold a fan of tiny calcite beads where drops have landed. Each bead is small, rounded, and pale. Some may merge into a low mound, others remain separate. The landing zone is a record of falling points, a mineral memory of water leaving the curtain's edge. And as the curtain slips behind us, the passage grows darker and plainer, and the maze returns to bare limestone, sediment, and silence. Plainness after beauty can be restful. The walls here have few formations, only pale stone, shallow pockets, and occasional dry cracks. The floor is firm, with a thin scatter of dust. The Nullarbor Karst maze does not need constant ornament to hold attention. Its quiet structure is enough, especially as we sink farther into stillness. Not every passage receives enough dripping to build stalactites or flowstone. Some routes are too dry, too ventilated, or too chemically balanced for much deposition. Others may have been active mainly as conduits, with water passing through rather than pausing. The absence of decoration is itself information about moisture, airflow, and history. You can feel that information as atmosphere. A plain passage feels older in one way, cleaner in another, more direct. The water that shaped it may have moved through efficiently, leaving rounded walls but few mineral ornaments. Later drying preserved the simple form. The cave becomes a quiet corridor of limestone, carrying us without display. The silence is deep here. There is no drip nearby. The air barely moves. The smell is dry mineral dust, softened by a trace of coolness from the surrounding rock. You can let your thoughts grow plain as well, with fewer details rising, fewer edges catching. The Nullarbor Karst maze keeps enough shape to guide us and enough darkness to calm us. Even in plain passages, rainwater's chemistry remains the central story. Carbonic acid in tiny amounts met calcium carbonate and dissolved it. Dissolved material left with the water. Space remained. Later air entered. The process is almost simple enough to repeat like a quiet phrase, yet large enough to create a hidden labyrinth beneath a vast plain. A small crack crosses the ceiling at an angle, then continues down the wall. It has not widened much, but it may still admit a little air or moisture. Some cracks never become passages. Others wait through long periods until conditions favor them. The potential for further karst development remains in the stone, patient and latent. You and I pass beneath the crack and continue. The floor slopes almost imperceptibly downward, and the darkness ahead seems cooler. The plain passage is not an ending, it is another interval, another breath between more active zones. In the Nullarbor Karst maze, intervals matter as much as chambers, and as the slope continues, a faint sound returns, not from above this time, but from somewhere low and ahead. The sound is barely more than a soft touch of water against stone. It may be a drip landing in a shallow pool, or a tiny flow moving through a narrow slot. It comes and goes as the passage bends. You hear it with the quiet part of the mind. The Nullarbor Karst maze is guiding us toward water again. The floor darkens first, then the lower walls. The air becomes slightly cooler and more humid, with a clean scent of wet limestone rising from ahead. A small groove appears along the floor's center. It holds a thread of water, thin enough to be silent unless it crosses a lip. After all the dry passage, the thread feels vivid in its restraint. This thread may be recent seepage draining from upper levels after rain. It may also be part of a persistent low flow fed by slow groundwater movement through the limestone. Either way, it shows that the karst system remains connected and responsive. Rainwater continues to travel through the Nullarbor, even when surface dryness makes that movement easy to forget. You can imagine the thread's path over the next few meters. It avoids a pebble, slips through a shallow notch, spreads over a smoother patch, and gathers again in a narrow runnel. It carries almost nothing visible, yet chemically it may hold dissolved calcium and bicarbonate, tiny traces of the limestone it has touched. Water remembers by carrying. At a small lip in the floor, the thread falls into a pool no wider than a bowl. The sound is soft, a continuous murmur if the flow is steady, or a separated ticking if the flow is weak. The pool's edge is whitened by mineral deposits, showing that water has paused here many times before moving on. You and I rest beside this miniature cascade without making it lively. It is not a waterfall in the waking sense. It is only water lowering itself by a few inches in darkness, making a sound small enough to help sleep. The cave listens, the pool receives, and the thread continues through another narrow notch. Such small hydraulic steps can focus mineral deposition. As water spills and loses carbon dioxide, calcite may accumulate at the lip, gradually building a rim. That rim changes the pool, which changes the flow, which changes future deposition. Even a tiny feature becomes a self-shaping system over long time. And as the thread of water slips onward, we follow it into a lower chamber where the sound spreads out and becomes nearly silent again. The lower chamber receives the thread of water without showing much movement. It spreads into a shallow darkness at the floor, then disappears beneath a lip of pale limestone, leaving only a faint shine behind. The air is cool and still, and the scent of wet clay rests close to the ground. Here, In the Nullarbor Karst maze, rainwater has come as far as it needs to come tonight, into a place where the stone keeps its quiet. Around you, the walls are rounded by ages of contact, and the floor is softened by fine sediment that has settled grain by grain from the plain above. There is no surface wind here, no wide horizon, no glare from the sun. Only the slow memory of water remains, held in mineral rims, dark seams, low pools, and the patient hollows of limestone. You can let your body become as still as the chamber itself. The last sound is almost too small to follow. A drop forms somewhere in the ceiling, falls through the dark, and touches the floor with a muted note that fades before you can hold it. Then the silence returns, wide and gentle, filling the passage behind you and the hidden rooms ahead. The Nullarbor rests above, broad and pale, while beneath it, the maze remains folded in darkness. The sediment here has been settling for longer than thought can comfortably measure. Grain by grain, drop by drop, the rain has entered the stone and made a calm interior beneath the open land. And now you are here, at the quiet bottom of the water's path, where everything is finally still,